Welcome back to another Xtreme Book Club video. Today, I have a treat for you. It is the longest Xtreme Book Club to date. A book that a lot of people have been recommending me ever since I did The Troop by Nick Cutter last year. It is one of the better books we've done in my opinion, and Nick Cutter is a talented author. Today, we have a book that I consider leagues better even than The Troop, and that book is The Deep by Nick Cutter. It feels like a mix of The Troop and House of Leaves, which is my favorite book. It has a very eldritch and unknowable feel to it, something very unnatural about it. But it's also very well written as well as emotional, even getting me to cry near the end. I believe this is within the top 5 books we've covered on this channel, hands down. But if you don't know how we do things on this channel, let me break it down for you. We start out with an intro, which you are listening to now, where we give a little introduction to the book and its author. Then we get into the summary, which is the longest part of the video, where we do just that, summarize the book. Then finally, we get into the analysis, where we analyze the themes and messages of the work. But before we get into it, this is the first full video that I have released after I've hit 100,000 subscribers. I cannot even fathom how big of a number that is, and each and every one of you has changed my life. This past year and a half has been some of the best times I've ever had in my life, and it's all thanks to all of you. The next 2 weeks will be Xtreme Movie Nights, but the week after, which should be Wednesday the 20th, will be the 100,000 subscriber special, which will have an intro with me in person talking, and then a normal Xtreme Book Club after with the highly anticipated Dracula review. So get ready for that. But before I waffle on anymore, let us get into the longest Xtreme Book Club video ever. Nick Cutter's The Deep. Luke saw the old man's head, and it was covered in a few praying mantises. He wondered what attracted them. His driver saw them too and gave an uneasy tss. At first, Luke thought it was a toupee or something, but as he got out of the Jeep into the humid Guam air, he saw it was in fact just the bugs he thought they were. The old man was walking directly into some building that was overgrown with vines and other plants. With no one else to take care of it, the shop would be reclaimed by the jungle in no time. He walked over and brushed the mantises off the old man's head. The old man's expression was the one he'd seen countless times by now. The big blank. His eyes had a milky white film over them and his tongue was covered in a dry white substance. He probably hasn't drank water in days. He forgot how. That's how it is when you catch the gets. You forget the little things first, and the big ones, and the things you need to survive eventually, like drinking water or breathing. Then you die without knowing anything. Luke pointed the old man in a direction and he blindly walked that direction. Luke got back in the car and drove off, watching the old man walking back into the jungle, having forgotten everything. They drove into the town of Inarawan. It looked normal. Old women playing dominoes and smoking tobacco. The shops weren't looted like a lot of other places were. If this truly was the apocalypse, it was a complacent and orderly one. As they drove, a girl about 8 years old smiled and waved at Luke while he was in his Jeep. She had those spots all over her like a banana. Soon, those spots would grow and have pus leaking out of them. Then she would forget the little things, like how to tie her shoes. Then the bigger things, like her brother's face, and eventually, she'd forget what the leaves on the trees were and how important they were to them. And eventually, she'd forget how to breathe. It wouldn't make sense to her anymore. Well, nothing would at that point when you get the gets. He saw the yacht moored just off the dock. It used to be owned by a syndicate who, like everyone else with the gets, forgot he even owned it. This disease had a lot of people forgetting they owned a lot of things. Uncle Sam reclaimed it in the name of science soon after. He could swim to the yacht if he wanted to, but he got in a small skiff to get over to it. Bugs flew around him as he got in the boat. Animals were unaffected by the gets for some reason, except for honeybees. As they sailed to the big yacht, Luke thought the ocean looked really blue today, like the barber side at barber shops back in Iowa City. He looked back down at the town and saw a large church in the distance. It was burned to the ground. Nothing else in the village had, just the church. "Dr. Nelson!" a voice sounded when he got close to the yacht. Luke looked up and the man stood on the deck as he helped Luke get on. "I'm Leo Bathgate," he said. Luke looked around. This yacht was beautiful, luxurious even. "I know, I've never stepped foot on anything like this either," Leo said to him. "How was your trip, Dr. Nelson?" he asked. Luke wanted to tell him it felt endless. 8,000 miles from here to Chicago. A lot of things were empty along the way. Gas stations with no gas, or tire stores with no tires. O'Hare Airport, hate that airport by the way, was really strange. Most of the shops were closed, but the airport itself was packed full. People still need to fly. On the airplane, 2 air marshals now sat at the end of every row. When he got to San Francisco for his connecting flight, he boarded a small plane where he was the only passenger. He slept as much as he could to get to Agana. Luke finishes reminiscing and says, "My trip was long. Very long." Leo explains that Luke can put the luggage below deck, and he does so. After he puts his stuff down, Bathgate calls out from above, "Dr. Nelson? Your brother we're going to see. Do you think he'll have an answer? Or a cure for the Gets?" Luke looks up and says, "I'm hopeful." "Right," Leo calls back down. "That was the reason he was here, wasn't it? To try to talk to his brother, the brilliant scientist who is currently 8 miles deep in the Pacific Ocean. But no one had heard from him in days, though." On the yacht, Luke slept. He dreamt of his mother. He often did in times of stress. It was a memory of when he would sleep in bed when he was 8 years old. His mother came in his room with her huge 400-pound body and slipped beneath the covers with him. Her body huge and dough-like. She whispers something in his ear, and then he wakes up back on the yacht, covered in a cold sweat. His mother had a way of doing this to him. Her name was Bethany. Battle Axe Beth, they would call her. A large woman in many ways. Before she gained the extra 200 pounds even. She was well over 6 feet tall and had booming laughter and was intimidating in many ways. She was even described as quite beautifully imposing before she gained all the weight. She used to be an orderly at a home for mentally troubled kids. It was called the Second Chance Ranch, though when she was in her sour moods, she would call it the No Chance Ranch. When she first worked there, she was not welcomed as one of the other orderlies. Most of them were huge men, mostly African American, and they figured that even though Beth was large, she was still a woman. However, old Battle Axe Beth proved that she was one of them whenever she would jump in dog piles of orderlies trying to subdue someone, and she was always the first one to pin the person to the ground and twist their arms and legs so they couldn't move. He heard this from a friend whom he went to vet school with, a guy named Honey. The man apparently was at Second Chance Ranch when his mother was an orderly. "How's Battle Axe Beth?" he asked Luke. Luke ignored the question, but Honey continued. "She was a viper. Smart, but only in extremely specific circumstances." Luke says, "Yeah, he figures she was." Honey continued that one time Battle Axe Beth reprimanded a kid who had an eye that poked out too far from his face. All this kid did was steal an apple on the ranch. His mom told this kid that she would slice his eyes open so the devil's eyes could stare out through his. The kid was only 14. Luke felt horrible. He says he's sorry that his mom was like that. Honey says, "Oh, he's sorry for Luke. He had to live with her, be raised by her." Luke remembered in his sweat-stained sheets on the yacht what happened to his mother then. One day, she found a really scared kid. He was mentally ill and slit the throats of the sheep on the ranch because they, quote, kept secrets. She tried to stop him, but this was a big kid, and he slammed a gardening hoe into her left leg as she fell. He beat her mercilessly after, and the wound never healed right. All she ever said after she got hit was, "Lord love a duck!" over and over. When the other orderlies found her, they tore the kid off her, and she was sent to the hospital. She was then put on permanent disability from that day onwards. She would sit in the house and didn't leave until the day she died. She would sit in front of the TV and make Luke sit with her. Before that accident, Luke loved his mother fully, despite the worrying signs like her beating him. But after, she was unbelievably cruel. That was her true nature. She just took a while to express it to her sons. Luke finally fell back asleep, and when he woke up in the morning, he felt like he had another nightmare, but he couldn't quite remember what it was. He thought of his brother, Clayton, and how he used to have horrible night terrors as a kid. Luke would crawl in bed with him and yell, "Clayton, it's just a nightmare, it's okay!" And his skin would feel so hot, like someone boiled alive. He got out of bed that morning on the yacht, and it felt like he was walking on cotton balls. That's how luxurious the carpet was in this room. He tries to get water, but the spigot didn't give any. His throat was dry. He looked at his watch, and it showed the time back home. Still 3:09 p.m. But when he got to the deck of the boat, the moon was still high in the early morning sky. He wanted to change his watch time, but it didn't really matter. Where he was going, it was going to be pitch black 24/7. "You hungry?" Leo Bathgate called out to him. "Starving, actually," he said as he looked at the moon on the horizon. It looked like they were in a tunnel with the moon being the light on the other side. Leo says the yacht only has Japanese food and whiskey on board. He gives Luke a piece of squid jerky, and Luke is surprised that it isn't that bad, actually. Leo then says, "The whiskey I have is really expensive, too." He pours himself with Coke mixed in. "Sorry, I'm no high-class whiskey drinker like you, Luke. I need some Coke in it," Leo says. Luke laughs and says he's no high-class drinker. He's just a veterinarian. His brother's the rich scientist. Leo says, "Just a vet? That's a damn fine living." Luke says, and he loves it, but he's not rich or anything. He has no qualms of drinking low-class alcohol. Besides, the boat they are on likely belongs to a dead man. He's not picky. Leo looked at the night sky. He says that the ocean here has a depth of about 2,300 feet. He says he's been on the ocean his whole life, but never under it. He laughs and reminisces about his father and their journeys. Luke, meanwhile, looks at the sky and thinks about old conversations he had with Clayton looking at the very same sky as kids. Clayton would tell him that the lights in the sky were stars, billions and billions of miles away, and that took millions of years to reach them, the light of them at least. They were literally seeing ghosts of stars. Luke asked his brother, if they are ghosts, why aren't we afraid of them? Clayton looked at him as if he were crazy, something common around then. Leo snaps Luke out of his memory by saying he's sorry he brought up Luke's brother a second ago. Luke says he doesn't mind. He's become a stranger in recent years anyway. Leo says a lot of people are like that nowadays due to the gets. Like my wife was, he says sadly. Luke could tell he needed to talk about it, so he asked, "What about your wife?" Leo says he met his wife in school and she was always a bit crazy. She would shoot cans with a slingshot with him. One day he tried to shoot a crow with that slingshot and she hit him. He smiles at this memory. He says he proposed to her at a burger barn of all places when they were 19. 30 years of marriage later, it happened. She began forgetting the little things, like their anniversary. No big deal, that happens. But then she forgot how to use turn signals in cars. Once again, not the biggest deal. He could always drive. This was before the Gets was a well-known disease, so they thought it was early onset dementia. She was 50 after all. Then she started forgetting things one after another fast. Luke looked at him and says, "Leo, you don't have to continue." But Leo cuts him off and says, "What, my story too depressing for you, Doc?" Luke thinks that he has a far worse story and just waits for Leo to continue. Leo continues and says, one day he sat across the dinner table and his wife just forgot how to chew. Her mouth fell open and she could never remember to close it after that. He carried her up to her room that night and sobbed next to her. That night, she just stopped. Forgot how to live or something. No one really knows exactly how the Gets kills you in the end. Luke thinks he understands. It was the same feeling when his son went missing. Zach. Leo says, "Anyway, after that I started selling the house and I became a commercial boat captain, delivering supplies to the Hesperus." Luke figures that he himself is considered cargo then. Leo says when Luke's brother went down, he was told to hold on to hope. Some cure for the Gets. Even if his loved ones had long since passed from it, he still held on to hope. All of a sudden, the military radio on the yacht crackled on. "Bathgate? What's your ETA?" it said. Leo calls out, "About 13 hours, give or take." The radio crackles back. "You better hurry. Something has surfaced." They arrived a bit sooner than anticipated, and then they saw it. The Hesperus, named after the god of the evening star, Venus. Though sometimes it got misconstrued as Phosphorus, or the devil, which is a much darker connotation, and ironic at that. It was like a big oil rig floating on nitrogen sacks in the middle of the ocean. Thousands of them. It was like a city over the Mariana Trench. Luke's brother, Clayton, was 2 miles deeper than even the Mariana Trench, in the Challenger Deep, in a small base down there called the Trieste. "Pretty amazing, huh, Doc?" Leo says. Luke thinks it is pretty amazing. The oil rig-like structure was huge. He got off the gangplank and Leo says, this is where he leaves him. Luke didn't want that though. Although he'd only known Leo Bathgate for a few hours, he wanted him with him. But all he could do was shake Leo's hand and thank him for the lift. A golf cart was waiting for him and a soldier was driving it. Tons of soldiers were on this floating city. Luke wondered why they wore camouflage when they were in the middle of the ocean. The soldier drove him inside the structure on the city and sparks flew down from the ceiling as they drove. They reached their destination and a jolly-looking scientist pops his head out of the room and says, "Dr. Nelson, right? You look like Clayton." Luke follows him and he thinks of that message they got 12 or so hours ago. Something has surfaced, it said. Luke followed the man into a room with monitors. 7 or 8 of them, all with labels under them. Things like Clayton's chambers, or O2 purification, or watershed, or Toy's chambers. Seemingly all cameras surveilling down in the Trieste. However, most were dark, or blank, or staticky. Could just be a power outage, the scientist said. He offered his hand and says his name is Fells. Luke asks, how long has the monitors been out? He doesn't answer. Luke asks, are you my brother's partner, Fells? Fells scoffs and says, how long has it been since you've seen your brother? Or even talked to him? Weeks? Months? Luke thinks it's been a bit longer than that. 8 years. But he doesn't want to tell Fells that. Fells says that Dr. Clayton doesn't have so much as partners as he has subservience. His behavior is antisocial, to say the least. Clayton almost never sleeps, because he's a genius or a savant. His ways are tolerated because of that. Fells says that he and Clayton both went to MIT, actually, and Fells thought himself a rival to Clayton. However, during those days, Clayton didn't see it that way. Clayton was fighting the world, against science as they knew it. He didn't care about rivalries. Besides, in the end, Fells wasn't much of one anyway. Clayton graduated high school at 12 years old. It was an exemption, because it was clear that he was very much smarter than everyone else. Like making Beethoven to learn from a church piano teacher was how it was often described. Fells asks if Luke knew about what Clayton did to get into MIT. Luke says he knows it well. Ernie. A mouse that Clayton experimented on when he was that young. Morbid that he would name them because of what would happen to them, but Clayton always named his test subjects. Clayton had heard about an experiment about grafting an ear onto a lab rat's back once. He wanted to outdo that experiment. So he showed Luke his mice. He stayed for days in his home lab under the house, without sleep at that. Luke would find dead mice in the garbage in the following days, some with weird lumps, some seemingly normal. A few days after that, Clayton called Luke down to see what he'd done. A mouse with a nose grafted onto its back, and it was alive at that. It twitched. The nose twitched as the mouse did. Clayton showed his brother how the mouse's nerves spread through the grafted nose, so it would twitch whenever the mouse did. Luke thought it was amazing, but then looked on the floor. A different mouse, one named Ernie. The mouse was shaved and hairless. 3 of its legs were ground down to nubs of flesh, its intestines hanging out. Luke then asked, Clayton, what have you done to that thing? Clayton says, he used cells from Ernie to keep the experiment going on Doug, the nose mouse. Why is it alive? Luke asked as he saw the poor thing was still breathing. Clayton shrugged. I don't know. Living things just don't want to die sometimes. They're resilient. Luke, choking back tears, says, he's taking Ernie. Clayton says he doesn't care about that one anymore. He got everything he needed from it. Luke then takes the mouse and puts it down mercifully and buries it in the yard and cries. Clayton watched scornfully from his window. Luke then stops reminiscing. Yes, I remember the damn rat experiment, Fells. Fells shows him the monitors and the vitals on the monitors. Fells says that there are 2 alive down there still in the Trieste. Luke asks, what do you mean, still? Fells says they'll get into that. But right now, on that ship in the Challenger Deep is Dr. Clayton Nelson and Dr. Hugo Toy, along with animal test subjects. A few dogs, bees, reptiles, amongst a few other animals. Luke then says, let him rephrase, why are they down there in the deep? Fells' face twists as if that's a loaded question. They've discovered something miraculous. They walk into the next room and the only thing in it is a small container, about the size of a hotel mini fridge. Fells says, this is amazing. A few years ago, this thing would be under such high security and no one would be allowed to see it. But nowadays, with the gets out there, security isn't really what it used to be. He says this is like holding the Hope Diamond in a gym locker. He puts in a code and the fridge hisses and lets out extremely cold air. Fells says, however, no one would be able to move this thing if they knew what it was. It's exactly where it wants to be anyway. He takes out a small petri dish from the fridge. Luke asks, does it have to be that cold? Fells says they don't want it growing yet. So yes, the petri dish's glass was foggy with air, but then it started to clear. What is it? Luke asked. It looked mundane, like a piece of jello the size of an egg on a petri dish. Fells says it cannot be categorized. It matched none of the DNA of any known flora or fauna. It's a collection of cells that matches nothing we've ever seen. Your brother calls it ambrosia, after the Greek word for the nectar of the gods. We had a few more samples like this, but they disappeared. Luke says, "Do you mean died?" But Fel says, "No. Vanished. Evaporated or something. It's unknown where they went." Luke asks, "Well, what does the ambrosia do?" And Fel says, "Well, at first they put it on a sugar-based gel when they first found it, and it absorbed the gel. Consumed it." Luke says, "Like ate it?" But Fel says no. He tells Luke, "Imagine that you eat a whole meatloaf. It would be like if once you ate the meatloaf, you absorbed it and grew a meatloaf-shaped arm with your own cells." He says it's kind of like sharks, how they're so primitive. They're the perfect organism already and never really evolved. It's almost not of this earth, he thinks. Luke asks Fels if he means, does that mean it's alien in nature? But Fels doesn't reply. Luke looks back and sees the ambrosia isn't as mundane as he once thought. It had colorful veins like lightning going all through it. It made him want to watch the little gel for hours. "Careful, Doctor, it has a weird way about it. Look away." Luke wanted to yell at Fels, the fucking killjoy, but he snapped away from looking at it. "Sorry, I don't know what came over me," he says to Fels. Fels says it's one of the effects of the ambrosia. This'll pass. Luke asks, where was this stuff found? Fels says there was once a Polish ship a couple of years ago in the Mariana Trench, and as they were surfacing, they saw an anglerfish. Luke asks, why would that be weird? But Fels says it was really close to the surface, like a couple 100 feet down. Anglerfish live deep in the water. The pressure keeps their bodies together. One that high up should have literally disintegrated, but it was perfectly fine. So they caught the anglerfish and studied it. Something else about the anglerfish is how you can see how old they are by the rings on their scales, like how you can see a tree's age by the rings on the wood. But this anglerfish, it had innumerable rings, overlapping over and over, so much so that the only word for this fish was immortal, ancient. When it was studied in the light by a doctor, it nearly exploded, rotted in real time into black gunk. The scientist found a speck among the goo no bigger than a grain of sand, and she put that speck in a petri dish. That was ambrosia. Luke says, so the stuff is attaching itself to aquatic life to make them immortal. Fels says, well, that fish was an anomaly. It probably hunted near a sea vent or something. The stuff is nowhere in the Mariana Trench. Where it likely came from was the Challenger Deep, an offshoot of the Mariana Trench that goes even deeper, miles deeper even. And that's where the Trieste is. They put cameras down there and saw movement around the Challenger Deep. Nothing should be able to live down there at all. So they figured that's where the ambrosia was. Luke asks, why did they call his brother then? Fels says, well, that stuff's a riddle. And who else can solve it but the world's greatest scientific riddle solver, your brother? He says, but he has one more thing to show Luke. Fels opens his laptop and shows Luke a video of a mouse. I assume you know of your brother's cancer mice? How could Luke not? It was way more famous than even the ear mouse story. Clayton had found a way to give cancer to a mouse. Not just that though, he found a way to breed mice with cancer from the day they were born. All stages of cancer, all kinds of cancer. They were an extreme scientific advancement. Scientists could order mice with certain types of cancer for research, so they could figure out cancer cells and such. Animal activist groups didn't really like that discovery that Clayton made, though. Fels then opened a video file on his computer called Cancer Mouse Ambrosia Test 1B. Clayton was brought here after the last scientist dropped out of dealing with the ambrosia, Fels says. Luke figures that Clayton muscled her out of it, but Fels says it's not the case. Just watch the video. Luke asks, why is it called 1B? What happened to test 1A? Fels says, for some reason, the ambrosia didn't act with the other mouse. But just watch this one. Luke looked at the screen and it was a video of a cancer mouse who looked to be on death's door next to a speck of ambrosia. It squeaks an almost pleading sounding squeak and then... What the fuck? What just happened? Luke asks. Fels then rewinds the video and the same thing happened. Luke couldn't believe it. It looked like the ambrosia almost entered the mouse through the skin. But there was no hole, no cut, no scar. It's almost as if the mouse absorbed it. The mouse then jumped around and ran happily. Fells says Luke already knows what he's going to say. The cancer was eradicated. Luke asks, what about the ambrosia? Where'd it go? Fells says, well, obviously it went inside the mouse somehow. But after they looked into it, the mouse was completely unchanged. The only thing was the cancer was gone. Luke now understands the reason all of this is happening. The Trieste, the army, and everything being here. They think that the ambrosia will cure the Gets. Luke asks, how do they know that the ambrosia will cure the Gets? Fells says, well, animals can't get the Gets, so they can't be for sure, but that's why they're researching it more down in the Challenger Deep. Fells says this may be some kind of panacea or something. Fells then asks if Luke is religious. Luke says, no, most scientists aren't. But Fells says one day when he's working with Clayton, his brother once said, what if the devil made the perfect disease and God released the perfect cure to that disease? Fells says that Clayton thinks not like everybody else. He thinks in locks and keys. Every problem has a solution. Every lock has a key. Fells says maybe the ambrosia has a mother organism down there or something. Huge with all that ambrosia. That's why Clayton's down there. Luke says, okay, he gets it, but the one thing he doesn't understand is why did the woman scientist who discovered the ambrosia leave the project? That had to be Clayton's bullying, right? Fells looks up and says, Dr. Park, the woman who discovered the ambrosia, killed herself soon after finding it. She seemed really happy beforehand, but no one knows what goes on in one's head. All of a sudden, another voice rang out. Just the man I was hoping to meet. A woman stepped into the room, broad shoulders and an angular face. She seemed stern and important, piercing green eyes and military fatigues. She held out her hand and introduced herself. Lieutenant Commander Alice Sykes. She looks over at Fells and says she hopes he got Luke cut up. Fells says yes, and Alice asks, does he know about what surfaced as well? Fells says, no, I didn't tell him yet, sheepishly. Alice says she understands. It's hard to talk about. She says, alright, let's get this show on the road. She gets in a golf cart and the other two follow. They drive through the floating base and Alice says, all of this was built by taxpayers. Not just American taxpayers either. All countries. After all, what good is money if the world is destroyed by a disease? Luke asks why is it all American soldiers on this facility then? Alice shrugs and says she guesses it's because America always takes point. They stop by a large pill-shaped submarine and Alice says this is what Luke is going down in. Luke says he doesn't know how to use a submarine, but Alice says, well, good thing she's going with him then. She says she hopes he doesn't have bad breath because it's really tight in there. She calls the sub the Challenger 5. Luke asks what happened to the Challenger 4. Alice looks grim and says, well, Dr. Westgate came back up with it. He was with Luke's brother. He was a well-put-together man, but the pressure down there is immense, physical and mental. She then motions to a door nearby. She says what remains of him is behind that door. She warns him though. Although down in the Challenger Deep, it's still planet Earth, it's nothing like anyone has ever seen down there. She says, Luke, you don't have to look at Westgate's remains. But Luke says, no, you probably should. Alice nods in a way that says he shouldn't have agreed to look at it. They walk in and it's like a meat locker how cold it is. Alice says that all the scientists down there were mentally sound. Maybe a few hiccups here and there, but due to the situation that was understandable. Westgate must have cracked, Alice says. They wanted to check on him, but they couldn't go down due to an underwater tornado, but she assures that that's cleared up now. Yesterday they saw signs that somehow Westgate had taken the Challenger 4, which was the only ship down there at the Trieste at the time, and surfaced it. Though he was never shown how to drive it, he somehow knew. As he ascended the submarine, the comms went out. Somehow. Someone or something broke them from within inside the sub. Something had been done to them, and something had been done to Westlake as he came up in the sub. But more likely, he did this to himself. She motions for Luke to look inside a room. Luke can't tell what he's looking at first. It's a bloated corpse, but it was all scar tissue. Rings upon rings of pink scars all around his body. Some big, some small. His limbs were all bent in weird directions, probably due to the buildup of nitrogen as he rose too fast. His face was the worst of all, though. But Luke couldn't look away. The scars were placed there delicately almost. It reminded him of a rubber band ball, with lines of scars going around everywhere on his body. Luke looked away finally and said, "Please shut the door." Luke fell to his knees and asks, "How is that possible? No human can take that much trauma and scar it up." He asks, "How long would the sub take to surface from down there?" Alice says, 8 or 9 hours. Luke says maybe the goo was with him in there or something, but Alice says no, there was no trace of it. But he did that to himself. He had to have. No one else was on that sub. She looks away and says, "Fells showed you that cancer mouse getting cured with ambrosia, right?" Luke then connected the dots. She didn't have to say it. He envisioned Westlake cutting himself open over and over, and his body instantly healing it every time, unable to die. Luke then wonders, but then how did he die? Did the goo disappear like Fells said could happen? Luke then realizes how bad he's been shaking. "What else was in the sub, Al?" he asks. Alice took Luke back on the golf cart, and Fells goes back to his lab. For the first time, Luke thought to himself, why me? Why do I have to go down there? Alice must have seen the look on his face because she says, "You're thinking why me, right?" Luke agrees and elaborates. "I mean, I'm Clayton's brother, but I have no skills here. I'm a vet." Alice says, "So you want to know why we aren't taking a big group of soldiers and going guns blazing, right?" "Well, we need someone to talk to Clayton. One screw gets taken out of the whole Trieste, and it pancakes instantly. If you're wondering why you, in particular, your brother asked for you specifically." Luke says, "No, that can't be true." Alice takes out an iPhone and plays an audio recording. "Come home, Lucas. Come down, Lucas. Come home, Lucas. We need you. Come home." The recording sounded really weird, like a record slowed down. Luke is confused, though. Clayton has never needed anyone his entire life, except for when he had his night terrors when they were kids. But why now? "Well, that isn't my home down there," Luke says. Alice says, "It's no one's. But they researched and found out who he was and brought him here." Alice drives him back to the Challenger 5, and Luke sees a few military personnel spraying foam over all the cracks of the window and the indents of the sub. Alice says that foam is made to withstand absurd amounts of pressure. The Trieste is practically held together with that stuff. She then brings him back to the Challenger 4, and it looked identical to the Challenger 5. But knowing what happened in it sent a chill down Luke's spine while he looked at it, like the chill of the Challenger deep infected the thing itself. She says the military police are still investigating the submarine, like a ghost story. She chuckles. She beckons him to look inside, and they open the door and it smelled of insanity, like malt vinegar, his mother would always say. Inside there was no blood, which was strange because of what happened in it. Alice tells Luke to look up. On the ceiling, there was a sentence written in blood, all in crazed lettering. It looked like it said, "The Ag-May are here. Come home. We need you. Come home." A chill ran up Luke's spine, the same feeling as when he saw Westgate's body. Even more was the connection of what his brother said on that voice recording. "Come home, Lucas. Come home." Part 2. The Descent. Alice left Luke to make preparations for the sub. In less than an hour, he would be diving 8 miles down into the Challenger deep. He thought about it, and he really was the perfect candidate for this. A veterinarian whose life stopped 7 years ago when his son disappeared on an autumn night. He had nothing to lose. This would give him a small, yet vital, sense of purpose yet again. He dipped his toes in the ocean and saw a school of piranha-like fish. He thinks how Zach, his son, would have been terrified of those fish. When his son was 5, like most 5-year-olds, he thought that there were monsters in his closet. Luke swung the door open for his son and said, "Look, there's no monsters. They're just figments of your imagination." Zach looked at him strangely and says, "Figmen?" Luke laughed. "No, buddy. Figments, not figmen. They aren't real." Later that night, when he was in bed with his wife, Abby, Zach came into the room and said, "The Figmen were back." Luke said they told his son that there is no monster. Abby tells Luke to just go humor him. A child shouldn't feel scared in his own home. He should feel loved. Luke knew she was right. If this was his mother, she would have expected some unconditional love from her kids, not the other way around. Luke got up and got his toolkit and had Zach show him where the monster was. He took out a stud finder and pretended to look around for a minute. He asked, "What do these Figmen look like?" to Zach. Zach says they're small and old-looking, wrinkly. Their hair stood up on Luke's neck. What a weird description. He imagined them staring at his son from the closet. Luke made up a quick lie saying, he hasn't heard of that kind of monster, but he knows how to make a monster trap. He gets Zach's Halloween candy and some dust and says they'll be trapped in this little circle of dust and the candy will lure them in. Luke asks his son for a strand of his hair for the spell to work. He gives him one, and then Luke goes downstairs and finds 2 pieces of obsidian he picked up on his recent trip to Hawaii. He waited for his son to fall asleep, and snuck in his room and put the obsidian in the circle. The next morning, his son woke him up, yelling, "The spell worked!" as he held the quote-unquote black calcified bodies of a Figman. Luke says it's a cocoon. He should put it on his dresser to ward off other Figmen. The pieces of obsidian are still there to this day on his missing son's dresser. After he's reminiscing about all this, all of a sudden Alice comes back and snaps Luke out of it and says, "You ready to go?" After which they lowered the sub into the water with a sky crane, and Luke holds his bag over his shoulder. Just a change of clothes and toiletries. Though, he wonders where he'll spit the toothpaste. Alice says that she'll sit on the top chair in the sub and Luke will sit on the bottom one. Good news is, he'll have the better view. Bad news is, it's more cramped on the bottom seat. They get in the little submarine, and Luke was face to face with electrical panels. Alice says it's going to be an 8-hour dive. They're going to go straight down. She says she wishes she could pop an Ambien, but with the blood thinning going on as they dive, it would kill her. The sub was extremely cramped, and workers foamed the windows so they wouldn't break. Then they went under the water, and finally started their trip. They dove fast as Alice explains that they have lead weights all over the sub. They'll drop them when they get down, and then they'll rise back to the surface. They fell fast, past the deepest free dive and then past the deepest scuba dive really fast. The blackness also then set in. Alice says that Luke's never seen the type of darkness he's going to see down there. They stopped all of a sudden. Luke felt pops all over his body. Not painful, but ticklish almost. Alice explains that that is the nitrogen buildup. They'll stop again when they reach the abyssal zone. She tells him to look out the window, and he does, and he sees little glowing specks. Phytoplankton. They're bioluminescent. You'll see them more as we drop more. Then when we get really deep, you won't see anything at all, Alice says. It looked like snowflakes brushing against the window. It reminded Luke of the night he and his wife routed in the winter of Iowa City. He met her that night and fell madly in love. Every part of her, even her snaggled tooth as she called it. Her chipped tooth that she said that she would never get fixed because a perfect face has no character. They walked home after a night at the bar and she saw huge snowflakes just like those phytoplankton. All of a sudden, blue flesh and a huge eyeball the size of a dinner plate passes the window. It's a sperm whale, Alice says. Never seen one this low though. Luke panics a bit and asks, "Does this not bother you?" But Alice says, "No, she's made plenty of supply runs down here before. Besides, if they get a leak in the sub, even a pinhole-sized one, the sub would decimate them both in an instant. They would feel nothing. They would be fish pate before even knowing what happened." She says there's a lot worse ways to go down there. She then asks him if he's ever heard of the term short. He says, like the size? And she says no. It's a superstitious thing in the armed forces. They say when you are at the very end of your employment, or after taking a lot of lucky breaks, at the very end, when you are short on time before you retire, that is when you die, and your luck runs out. She says she's made so many trips down here, she keeps testing the black abyss. She feels like she's short now. She apologizes. She shouldn't talk like that. She tells Luke to take a nap. When they get deeper, the pressure messes with the REM cycles. Luke looks up and says, "The Agme are here." That was what was written on the blood of the sub. She laughs and says, "Is that how he read it?" She said it looked more like "the Ag Man is here" to her. He asks, does that mean anything to her? And she says, no. It was more than likely just Westlake going crazy and he wrote something. She doubts even he knew what it meant. Luke got hungrier as they descended further, but he didn't really want to eat anything. He shut his eyes and thought about his mother. She ate a lot after she got put on disability. She didn't take joy in it, however, it felt like. She would eat 3 or 4 pounds of porridge every night, edible sludge. Luke would get home from school and she'd be sitting in the dark with her wet mouth slopping down porridge as she watched TV. When she grew, Luke's father suggested that maybe she should cut a few carbs, and then she would always say, "We are but flesh." She would dominate the household and dominate every single part of the household. One night, Luke went to get a glass around midnight, and he caught his parents under the sheets. "You dirty boy," his mother would say to his father. The added girth of his mother might turn most men away from her, but it only increased his father's perfidy towards his mother. Like a whipped dog. She dominated him, and then she tried to dominate Luke after, in a different way, through control. Clayton would be down in his lab all hours of the day, and Luke was now the target. He had long found out the cruelty that grew along with his mother's size. One day, Luke came home from school and found her in his bathroom. She had her own bathroom, but it was a measure of control as well. Her fat folds falling over the tub. "Don't you ever knock!" she yelled at him. She also made him bring her drinks and make him sit with her as she watched TV. Sometimes, she would say nice things to him. "Lucas, you're my perfect little angel." But she could also become horrible out of nowhere just right after. "Lucas, I had such high hopes for you. How sad you are." Luke thinks that she would only say nice things just so that the mean things would hurt that much worse. Soon after the bathtub incident, she took away all of his comics and gave them away to neighborhood kids for free. "You're too old for stories like that," she would say to him. She would say that they were childish and other kids needed them more. They could have a turn. To Luke, they weren't just stories, though. They were an escape from his life at home with his mother. He even created a superhero alter ego for himself called the Human Shield. His only power was his skin was impenetrable. He could not be hurt. He would stand in front of the women and children as the other superheroes fought the bad guys, so a stray laser beam or debris wouldn't hurt them. He wasn't the greatest superhero ever, but the big superheroes let him hang out with them at the Justice Hall. He knew that his mom knew that those comics were the worst thing that she could have gotten rid of for Lucas. They were an escape for him. One night soon after, she came home and up the stairs as Luke was sleeping in the bed, and then she got in the bed with him and spooned him. It wasn't a sexual thing, but a control one. She dominated over him with her body, and Luke could smell the acidic smell of her armpits and breath. She shifted her weight, and as she did, Luke knew it was his chance and he ran away from the bed. "Where are you going? Get back here!" his mother said. "This isn't your room, Mom. You don't sleep here," he replied. "This is my house. I sleep where I want," she said back. Luke thought to himself that he couldn't run away anywhere. He was only 13. All of a sudden, he jolted awake back at the sub. "Careful, Doc. You were dreaming. Grinding your teeth and mumbling," Alice said, her tank top not reaching her pants above him. He couldn't help but look. She cocked her head as if to say, "Like what you see?" But Luke quickly asked, "What was I mumbling?" Alice says, "You said something like, 'Get behind me. Get behind me where it's safe.'" Or something like that. Tink, tink, tink. The submarine made that noise. Tink, tink, tink. Luke asks, "What is that?" And Alice says, "It's the foam settling, and probably viperfish. They attack anything down here, but they aren't that big of a problem." But then the tinks came faster and faster. Alice says, actually, she's never seen this many of them. She's going to drop them really fast because this could be a problem with this many. She dropped the sub even faster, and Luke feels like his gums tighten around his teeth from the pressure. After they settle a bit, Luke looks up, and Alice has a bloody nose. Luke tells her, and Alice says, "You're bleeding too." From your eye, though. Luke wipes away under his eye, and sure enough, he had a bloody tear coming out. "It happens a lot down here. Blood comes out of non-traditional places," she says. Luke says that that'll take getting used to. Just as Luke starts to settle, a huge thwack smashes against the sub. "Oh, for the love of..." Alice yells. Luke looks out the window and sees a giant black patch of skin with a vein running up it. "The giant squid! I didn't think they could be down this far!" Alice yelled. The squid batted around the sub, and Luke held his breath, waiting for his life to end. But then Alice flipped on the lights on the outside of the sub, and it starts to scurry away. She says that she thought being in the complete darkness would draw attention away from them, but it did the opposite, it looks like. After she flicks them all on, the squid swims away even further and seems scared off. Luke could see it fully as it did. It was massive. The sub started having water droplets appear all over, and Luke asks, "Do they have a leak, or why is the sub sweating?" Alice says it's just condensation. It's extremely cold down here. Luke asks, "Why doesn't the water freeze then?" And Alice says, "Salt water doesn't freeze." She looks down at Luke and says, "You know, it's really weird. She's never had so many things go wrong during a descent. First those viperfish, then a giant squid. Down here, it's like a desert. No life for miles at a time. The fact that they got attacked twice, Luke finishes that thought in his head. It's like something's trying to stop us from getting to the Trieste. Alice says that she should have installed a radio on this thing. It was taking a while to get down there. She decides to tell Luke about the Trieste a bit. She says she brought the man who built it down here the first time. His name was Otto. He built the whole thing and then got everything inside of it. A real hero, she called him. She then says when she first stepped foot in the Trieste, it was weird. She says she's from Colorado. Near where she used to live as a kid, there was this cave system, a tourist trap called the Cave of Winds. When she was a kid, she disobeyed her father and went in alone one night with just a flashlight. Predictably, once she was in, she got lost. The flashlight broke. In the pitch black, it was horrifying, and she couldn't tell up from down in the deep darkness of the cave, and it was overwhelmingly dark, to the point of where it even reeked of darkness. She says she eventually found her way out and got in real trouble with her dad, but the first time she set foot in the Trieste, it was the same feeling, the same smell, a raw mineral smell, like something was alive and waiting in it. She says, anyway, Otto got the whole thing working, and he was the one and only person to die in the Trieste. Luke asks, how did he die? And Alice says, after he finished his job building it, they just saw his vitals went dark. When they went to check on him a few days later, they just found him curled in a ball in the specimen lab. Dead. Like he finished his job and just fell down and died. They don't even know how. She says, the whole station is self-contained though. Purified water, grown food, air filters, everything. But Luke wasn't listening anymore. He just thought about Otto, who died with the foam gun in his hand. Luke looks out the window at the overwhelming darkness. He thinks that the water down here stopped being water a long time ago. It's a barrier. It shields you from memories and common sense. True isolation. Memories fade down here. He does not like it. As they got really deep, it started snowing, and Luke didn't even notice at first. But once he does, he asks, what is that? And Alice says, it's death snow. It's the bodies of fish that float all the way down here. The further down they go, the more the carcasses lose pigmentation and break apart due to the pressure, making it snow-like in appearance. We're here, Alice says. Luke looks and sees nothing in the pitch black. But then he sees the faintest little light. Then another. Then another. All attached to a horrifying-looking structure. Black blood running through its veins inside. Luke had an overwhelming feeling of needing to get out of there right now. They need to ascend and never look back. But he stays silent. Part 3. The Trieste. They circled the Trieste several times. It was unnerving. It seemed like the base changed every time they made another rotation. He couldn't exactly figure out what was unnerving about it, though. It was some primal part of his lizard brain that made him want to stay away. It was all tubes attached to the ocean floor, which was covered in dead snow. It almost looked like a spider. It's got a certain look to it, Alice says. Luke asks if she's been in it before, and she says, yeah, a few times. She pushes the sub up to it and attaches it in some way that Luke doesn't understand. It gets attached and it airlocks so nothing would get in. Alice says, okay, it should be safe to step for the airlock now. Luke says, and if it's not? Alice smiles and says, well, then they won't feel a thing. She tells him to go first, and then he asks why him? And for the first time, he could see that irritated her a bit. Because I have to keep a watch on things from this side, Doc. Luke tried to steady his breathing. There was nothing on the other side of the airlock door. Just his brother and a few cute animals. That's all, he told himself. Alice looks in the airlock and then lets out a sigh of relief. Okay, it's locked. You're good. Luke puts his hand on the latch and a little voice in his head asks, what are you afraid of? A different one answered, everything. He started twisting the latch, but then stopped. What is that? He says. He looks through the porthole window and the darkness shifted around inside. He couldn't tell what it was, though, but something was moving in there. What are you waiting for? Alice asked as he looked through the crack of the door. Luke says, something's moving in there. And Alice says, light catches in weird ways down in the Trieste. Luke says, okay, and he walks through, and the little voice in his head says, don't. But he stepped in, and the latch swung shut behind him loudly. He wondered what Alice is doing. Above him sounded like tap, 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 like footsteps of children, as if there was an upstairs to the base. Not only that, it was freezing in there. He didn't understand how anyone could even live down here because it had to be below freezing temperatures. The noise above tapped again, and he could swear he heard laughter further in the base. Child's laughter. He froze. Zach? He asked out loud, but then shoved a hand over his mouth. He can't believe he just said his name. His son wasn't down here. He's missing. No, he's in heaven. Safe from all of this. His missing son couldn't be down here. That wasn't logical. He knew it. His son's dead. A voice in his head that sounded strangely like his mother said, "Can you be sure about that?" I never found him. All of a sudden, something sprinted at him from the darkness. He braced himself and raised his fists. But how could he fight a monster? When it was right on top of him, he swung, but then went right over the beast and fell to the ground. When he looked down in the darkness and put his hands out, the monster licked his hands and wagged its tail. Luke reached out and realized he cut his hand when he fell, and then he sees that it is no monster, but a chocolate lab wagging its tail. Jesus Christ. Hi, boy. Oh, a girl, he says as he rubs her all over. The porthole opens behind him and Alice walks out. Jesus, Doc, you're cut, she says, and she points to his hands. He said, yeah, he didn't exactly stick the landing a second ago. The dog seems okay, though, just really cold. Her back legs were shivering. The dog then sticks her nose in Luke's armpits for warmth and comfort. He wonders why Clayton's quote-unquote specimens are out of their cages. Alice points the flashlight down the hallway, and Luke can see it now, and it was all put together with friction tape. The whole base was held together by seemingly friction tape, which is extremely strong, but still tape. The hallway was like an oval here as well, and they would have to walk in a single file line with Alice to move forward. Alice then points the flashlight down and sees the dog. I see you've met Little B. Luke immediately got the reference of the name. Clayton named all of his specimens. This poor pooch was named after one of the two Sputnik dogs when the Russians sent dogs into space however many years ago. The two dogs' names were Little Bee and Little Fly. Those poor pooches were incinerated upon re-entry to the atmosphere, though. Luke isn't surprised that his brother would be that morbid with the names. Luke asks, why is the dog here not in a cage? As sad as that was to say. And why is it so cold in here? Alice says she has no idea why Little Bee's out of the cage, and the reason it's so cold is because the base seems to be running on phantom power. No heat at the moment in this hallway. She says they need to keep moving into the base so they can find Clayton. The dog, who Luke has decided to nickname LB, whined as they move forward. So Luke picks up the dog and puts her on his chest as they continue walking in a single file line. As they walk forward, they see copper pipes and tubes all over, like a stereotypical laboratory from a movie. That's what the light was catching earlier. What sounds like a scream rings out all of a sudden. Luke calls to Alice, was that a scream? Alice, unfazed, says, no, that was just a steam release valve, probably. A weird sound came from above them again immediately after. He made a note of that and continued. They get to a single door with a porthole window in it. Luke puts the dog down and tries to open it, but it's locked. Luke asks, what's going on? And Alice says, well, they have a lock in there in case they need to lock someone out. Luke thinks that would make this hallway like a prison, and he says, what do they do now if they can't get into the main base? Luke couldn't believe it. He came all this way and he might not even get to see his brother, and he might have to go right back up. Luke asks Alice what happens if they don't ever come to this door and let them in. Alice says, well, someone will come here, eventually, but they have heat and MREs in the Challenger 5 if worse comes to worse. However, there's another door further down the hallway, but that one is locked too. But Alice says they could check it again, though. But as she does, a slam comes from the windowed porthole and a face appeared. It was yellow, and it looked like it was screaming. Dr. Hugo Toy. Hugo the Horrible, Alice said, deadpanned. The face, which was once twisted in agony, now became cold and serious in the window. You are not who you are. You are not who you are. You are not who you are, he said behind the glass. He lifted a scalpel and pretended to slit his own throat. Luke was wondering if he was indicating that he would kill himself, or if he was threatening them. Luke then remembered that Dr. Fell said that there was once a man down here named Dr. Toy, Hugo Toy. The man then ran out of the hallway behind himself in a crab-like position without ever unlocking the door. Well, he's not going to let us in, is he? Alice says. Any idea what that was? Luke asks. Alice shrugged. It didn't look like he had the gets. He wasn't spotting. My guess? He just went batshit crazy. This place has a habit of doing that to people. If you're panicking in a normal place, you can step outside and get some fresh air. But here, you can't do that. Other scientists had little things to help calm themselves down, like petting dogs or running their hands through carpet swatches to calm down. My guess? Hugo Toy just went crazy. It got to him. Luke asks if they knew that he went crazy, would they have come sooner? Alice says that the cameras have been off for days. Luke knows that. They couldn't have known. Luke asks, why did she just call him Hugo the Horrible? She says, well, he works in chaos theory. Basically, trying to plan random events, which would make anyone crazy anyway. They then continued down the hallway to check the other door again, and Luke wanted to ask about the laughter he heard. His son's laughter? No, not that. He can't say that. She'll think he's crazy too. Besides, he didn't want to associate the memory of his son with the idea of this place. His son was lost on a crisp fall day when he was 6 years old. Luke took him to a park after school and they played for a while. When the sky started to get dark, Luke told him it was time to go. But Zach said he wanted to play one more game of hide and seek. Luke said, okay, just one more. He closed his eyes and started counting. 1, 2, 3. Zach screamed out after, count slower! Those were the last words his son ever said. Or at least the last ones Luke ever heard. He counted slower until he heard an unexplainable zipping sound, then a sucking sound like when you suck your own teeth. A spike of adrenaline in Luke caused him to open his eyes and look all around. He hoped he'd find his son in a hiding spot out in the open, but he wasn't there. He thought, okay, it's okay. He just found a really good spot, and I'm gonna find him and laugh at how scared I was. Luke looks all around the park, which was near a forest. Okay, buddy, you win, come out! His heart now beating out of his chest. No one came. He looked at the forest, which was a normal-looking forest, but in this moment it looked so hostile and scary. A voice in his head said, that's it, your boy's gone. He started screaming, Zach! Zach, that's enough! Please! But nothing. All it would take would be 10 seconds for some horrible person to get him in a van, and he would never see him again. Luke counted for 20. He ran into the forest and looked everywhere. He should have called the police right then and there, and he knew it. But he hoped he would find him and it would all be a funny story, like the time Abby lost him in a department store for a few minutes. Luke has visions of his son getting cut to ribbons before his very eyes, and then he finally calls the police. They got there pretty fast, and then Abby a few minutes later. He couldn't bear to look at his wife in her eyes. The first 24 hours were the worst. The police looked everywhere, even brought in police choppers. Maybe they'd find him in a river, shivering but alive. But nothing ever came. The first night was unreal. Like, this can't be happening feelings. The next day, Luke sat with Abby. Did he run away? She asked. But there would be no reason for it. The green of her irises held sadness, but something beneath it. Anger. Anger at Luke. It obviously wasn't his fault. It could have happened to anyone. Over the years, that anger might have turned to hatred, but Zach was never found. There were strange times he wished his son was dead. Then there would at least be closure, a funeral, an ending. He could rest in peace. But that never happened either. Zach, to this day, is considered a missing persons case. They never found him, or his abductors. Luke drove around every night for a year, looked all over town, other towns, even other states for his boy. And he saw him, too. Everywhere. He heard from other parents of missing children that was a common thing. Seeing their son's face everywhere when he wasn't. Unbelievable delight at finding their son, and then when they grab their child, it's a stranger's face. He even thought about stealing someone else's child when they weren't looking, thinking, serves you right, you gotta pay attention! But he shoved those dark thoughts out of his mind. He drove around that year and found nothing, coming home exhausted every morning in the dawn. One evening, when he woke up, Abby wasn't there. It didn't really surprise him. They hadn't really spoken in months. Just two hollow shells of grief. He knew it wasn't her fault, and she knew it wasn't his. But she left him regardless. because she began to hate the man she loved for something that wasn't his fault. But she sent the divorce papers a couple weeks later regardless. Luke signed them without trouble. He was even somewhat relieved. He returned to his vet practice not long after because it gave him time to not have to think about it. Though one memory of him shoving applesauce in his son's mouth when he wouldn't eat kept popping into his head. He wondered if his son ran away because of that incident. He knows that's silly, of course, but he can't stop thinking that. He hoped so desperately to forget these memories, forget his son, forget Abby. He wished he would get the gets. But the world had a funny way of working, not letting the man who wanted to forget. You okay, Doc? Alice's voice snapped him out of his memories. First his mother, now his son. Memories keep floating back today. Your brother will let us in, I'm sure of it. Just then, Luke gets a glimpse of something moving outside of one of the porthole windows to the ocean. It was long and spindly, like a tree branch. That's the ambrosia, Alice said. They have windows here to see where it's concentrated. The other door on the far end of the room had a light on the other side. They go over to it, and sure enough, it is locked still. Alice says, well, she thinks she might be able to pop the lock electronically if she contacts the surface. Wait here, she says. Luke sat there and did just that. He thinks he's so out of his element now. A glorified bellhop waiting for a door. God damn it. Christy goddamn fuck, he said as LB put her head on his lap. It felt good to take God's name in vain down here. He imagines God saying, go ahead, I'm used to it. He thinks he's closer to hell than heaven down here anyway. Just then, all the lights turn off. None remained on. Luke felt a primal fear wash over him, and LB sat straight up, like she was filled with that same fear. He then heard slithering. Unmistakable slithering. A snake slithering across a metal grate is what it sounded like. Dear God, did Clayton bring snakes down here? Pythons? Just then, the noise that sounded like footsteps above rang out again, and Luke pictures a bunch of kids with viperfish for faces running above him. Then more slithering, and then more metal chittering. It reminded him of another memory. One of him, Abby, and Zach in Arizona for vacation. Hey, I lived there. A memory of a giant millipede making its way into Zach's sleeping bag and biting him, making them take him to the hospital in the middle of the night. But Luke had killed that millipede, obviously. Just then, more whooshes and slishes and skittering across the floor. This wasn't a garden variety millipede, he thinks. This is a monster by the sound of it. The size of a tree, as thick of a trash can. A rational voice tried to tell him that those animals don't exist, and even if they did, they wouldn't be down here in the deepest depths of the ocean. A louder voice in his head began saying, it can't be real. It's nothing at all. He began to panic, and then he thought, it is real. Somehow, in this moment, he had made it real. Either him or the Trieste. His mother's voice played in his head. Oh, it's real, Lukey boy, and you know it. The dog knows it too. Look at her. It was almost on them now. Luke shoved LB behind him and reached for the latch over and over. He could swear he could see the segmented black monstrous pieces of the millipede body crawling towards him, and then all of a sudden, a loud airlock, whooshing noise, and he fell backward into the door that opened. He looked up and saw a familiar face. Hello, brother. Clayton Nelson's face was always in a state of looking like he just smelled something foul. His features were handsome and thin, like a member of some Eastern European aristocracy. Good to see you too, Luke said to his brother. Clayton looks down at Luke and says, let me help you up, mechanically. He offers Luke his unbandaged hand, and Luke notices he's in gray coveralls, like a janitor's uniform. His hair is long and unkempt. Luke looks back at the hallway. No giant millipede. Of course, it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Clayton looks at LB on the floor with Luke. Ah, I see you found the specimen, Luke says. Yeah, why is she out in the cold hallway? Clayton shrugs. He says that Dr. Toy must have gotten a hold of it. He asks Luke if he's seen Dr. Toy. He's gone mad, so it doesn't concern him what happens to it. Luke hates that he keeps using the word it for LB. She's a she, Clay, not an it. Clayton smirks. I'm sure the specimen appreciates your concern. Luke calms down and asks, what is this all about? He got a call at 3 a.m. to haul his ass to Guam, where the government plays him a recording of Clayton saying, come home, Luke, come down. Clayton for the first time breaks that annoyed look and says, what is this about a recording? Luke says that he was played a recording after Dr. Westlake surfaced. They brought him down because Clayton asked for him. Clayton's expression gave way to that foul smell again. You? What could you possibly add? He asked. Luke doesn't understand. How does Clayton not know about the recording? It was you, Clay. I heard your voice. Clayton says that's impossible. Luke wonders. Is it possible that Westlake went crazy and spliced together his voice or something? Clayton asks, what did he say about Dr. Westlake? What happened to him? Luke tells him, and Clayton doesn't even really seem to care. He says that he stole the sub, Clayton knew that, and it was strange because none of them were taught to pilot it. Luke asks, what's going on down here though? And Clayton just says, research. As if he's already accepted the fact that Westlake is dead, Toy has gone crazy, and Luke is here. Alice walks through the door then and says, finally, Doctor, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? I was trying to open the door remotely, but I can't get a clear signal to the surface. Clayton says, yeah, he's been having the same problem. He figures it was something on their end. But then Alice asks about this recording, and Alice says, it was real. She's listened to it dozens of times. It's his voice. Clayton scoffs. Why would I need a veterinarian? Luke hated how he said that. It was in the same cadence as if veterinarian was synonymous with moron. Alice says maybe he was sleepwalking, and sent it. It sounded weird, like he was sleepy. LB barks as if in approval. Clayton says that he's never sleepwalked in his life. It's not possible. Alice says that there have been studies of people on subs that have been documented sleepwalking even when they never have before. Something to do with the pressure and the brainwaves. Clayton says, maybe, but if they'll excuse him, he has to go back to work. Luke says, just like that? After all of this? Clayton says he doesn't care if they stay, just stay out of his way. Alice cheerfully says, wouldn't dream of it, Doc. Clayton says, fine, come on then. They walked down the next hallway, and Clayton looked more like he was floating than walking with how graceful he was. At the end of the hallway, Luke saw a small hole, the size of a manhole. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, he says. Alice says, well, there are segmented pieces of the Trieste that are attached with these little corridors. It's for structural integrity. People on the ISS have to do the same thing. It's a hole about the size of a manhole that they have to crawl through to get to the next section. They get through it, and then they get to a more open room. The lab they enter is filled with foldable tables and chairs. There's also a bunch of access hatches leading to more rooms. Labels near them say LT, LW, and LN. They all have small windows, and on the LW hatch, the window was blotted out by some black substance on the other side. On the other side of the lab was a much larger window than anywhere else. Luke asks, is this where they can view the ambrosia? And Clayton says, this is the only place you can see it well, at least. Clayton flips on a light switch, and the outside of the Trieste lights up the bottom of the ocean floor for a little bit. The lights went on for about 20 feet until a solid wall of darkness once again overtook it. He then saw it. A sheet of ambrosia. It looked like a manta ray on the ocean floor. We watch it here. Perhaps it watches us back, Clayton says as the sheet turns more into an O, like a hula hoop. Luke felt like it was teasing them. Clayton then turns off the light, and then Luke could swear he saw it form into a huge ball and rush the window. And Luke flinches, but nothing. It didn't happen. Are you catching much of it, Doctor? Alice asks. Luke thinks to himself, will it let itself be caught? But Clayton says, yes, it's coming to them now, actually. They can never have enough. Alice throws LB an energy bar that she had in her bag and walks towards the hatch labeled LW. This is Westlake's lab, right? Clayton says, yes, stay away from it. As he does, a monotonous knocking rang out from across the station. Is that Dr. Toy? Alice asks. Clayton says, who else? He's out of his mind. Is he dangerous? Alice asks. He's staked out in his fiefdom. I don't bother him and he doesn't bother me. Alice returns looking at the LW hatch. Luke gets it now. Lab Westlake, LW. Alice asks, what's the black stuff in the window? And should they go in the lab now that he's gone? Clayton says, that's not a good idea. He was working with toxic chemicals, and if we open the door, it might contaminate everything. Clayton then sits down, and Luke sees his eyes look extremely tired and sunken in. Something is happening to people down here. It's still happening. Clayton asks once again, why is Luke here? Luke explains that the government brought him here, if Clayton needs him. Clayton scoffs once again. Luke is reminded of a time he tried to bring chocolate milk to his big brother's lab so he could see the magic inside, only for Clayton to grab it and slam the door in his face. Have you ever considered that you don't know what you need anymore, Clay? Oh no, not genius Clayton, cute Clay the amazing. But then Luke fell to the floor, exhausted. Clayton says Luke needs some rest. Alice agrees and says they can finish this death match later. She leads Luke to the doorway that is labeled Access To. And as they walk, Luke asks Alice how is she doing. And she says, she's fine, but he can tell she's exhausted too. LB followed behind them. A voice in his head told him to flee, get out of this place. But then his mother's voice chimed in his head and said, he's a scaredy cat, huh? Alice leads Luke to a room that says it's Dr. Westlake's sleeping quarters. She hopes that that's fine. Luke doesn't even care at this point, though. He sits down and looks around the room. Piles of Westlake's research lie all over, one of which had a laptop. Luke grabbed it and scraped some of the gross black liquid off the mouse pad and opened it. There are 3 files on the desktop: Contact 1, Contact 2, and Contact 3. The next chapter is pretty haunting, and it's only like 4 pages, so I'm going to read it in full. The buzzing. That was the first thing he heard. Low and ragged. A burr of malfunctioning servo motor. Hundreds of them on the fritz at once. Next, a voice close to the microphone. Test 1, Wednesday, the 13th of August, 5:13 p.m. Westlake's voice. Keening, slightly nasal, the voice of a dead man. I noticed it last night. Last night? I think so. Yes. Time has a way of slipping through one's fingers down here. In the wall. Eating through it, you might say. Behind a box of equipment. That's why I missed it at first. The buzz settled. Westlake breathed heavily into the microphone. A hole. This is the best means of description, though that does not adequately describe the phenomenon. A hole, after all, is an emptiness, yes? This, on the other hand, the phenomenon is roughly 2 inches in diameter. I'd measure it to get its exact size, but that might be unwise to draw too near. It excludes a certain disturbance. A hole, Luke thought. In the station? Couldn't be. Insanity. Its surface is black, shimmery. I cannot discern whether it is simply lying atop the wall, or whether an exterior influence, something outside the station in the water, has managed to eat its way through. Either way, it appears to be growing incrementally. Amazingly, it has not breached the structural integrity of the Trieste. I wouldn't be able to transcribe this if so. Ambient noises, clicking, snappings. The bees do not seem troubled by it. In fact, they display great interest. They cluster at the edge of their containment unit facing the phenomenon, occasionally bashing their bodies against the glass. The other specimens, my lizards, display the opposite reaction. They huddle as far away from it as possible. I covered it with several long strips of duct tape. I have not alerted Dr. Nelson or Toy. They are occupied with their own labors and, well, this will sound foolish and doubtless unprofessional, but I don't want them interfering. Clayton most especially. If he knew about this, he would swing his hammer of divine authority. Westlake's voice changed. It became fiery, obsessive. This is mine. My discovery. A gulf of silence punctuated by Westlake's breathing. Then, listen to me. A covetous schoolboy hoarding my packet of candy. Good God, if the ethics committee could see me now, I imagine they would... Westlake's voice trailed off. His breathing grew heavier. Can you hear that? Is the microphone picking it up? Luke strained his ears. Nothing but that buzz and Westlake's ragged breaths. Sounds emanating from the phenomenon. I hear them. Feel them. There's a prickling sensation over my skin. How very bizarre. Silence. Can you hear them? Can you? Click. The file ended abruptly. Dreamily, his blood racing, Luke opened the next one. Test 2. The buzz again, quite a bit louder now. The hole has doubled in size. Ceaselessly, the phenomenon chews its way into the hole. The bees. Surely you can hear them. They are compelled by it. I let one out yesterday and it flew straight towards the hole, but it banked sharply away and settled on the wall a foot above. It made a few creeping attempts to approach the phenomenon, its antennae flicking, but never drummed up the gumption. When it settled back on the lab equipment, I cupped it in my palms in order to return it to its hive mates. The little brutes stung me. These are the most docile creatures I've ever dealt with. They were so tame I could almost sing them to sleep. Never once have I been stung without cause. I killed it. Ground it to paste beneath my palms. I was in a rare rage. The buzz rose and fell rhythmically. The other specimens have expired. Every lizard dead. They made it down here without issue, adjusting well to their new habitat. And yesterday I awoke, I've been sleeping in the lab the past few nights, to discover them all unmoving. Their bodies stiff, strangely white, as if they'd been injected with liquefied chalk. I've never seen anything like this. I wondered if, for a moment, could they have died of fright? Surely they cannot feel emotions. The bees, however, are thriving. Their numbers seem to be increasing. Luke could hear Westlake fumbling around. A sharp click. Suddenly his voice was amplified, the sound of it much richer. I hooked up a microphone. Hello? Hello? Good. It runs on a long cord. I'll attempt to feed the mic through the hole. This sounds absurd. How could I push a microphone through a hole eaten into the wall of an undersea station? Were I even able to do so, where would it go? That I am unable to answer yet. A series of staticky raps, the microphone scratching the weave of Westlake's clothes, Luke figured. I've hooked the microphone to a metal rod. I'll feed it through the hole from a safe distance. In all objectivity, the hole alarms me. It exerts a small pull. Not on one's body so much as the mind. I can only compare it to the extension of some kind of claw, I hope, sunk into the tissues of the brain. More noises as the microphone clipped to the metal rod bumped along the laboratory floor. Careful now. Careful. A series of harsh baps as the mic bumps into the wall. Luke could discern the exact moment it slipped through the hole. The resonance became somewhat watery, as if the mic slipped into a deep pool. But Westlake's voice remained clear. It's in! I've run a secondary audio channel to record my own commentary. For a long while, nothing. Only the liquid shifting as the microphone drifted in whatever lay beyond the hole. Then a powerful knock. Distant yet resonant. Hello? Westlake's voice made a noise of its own, a chiding tsk, as if sickened at himself for thinking something might answer him. The noise came again, that faraway knock, and again, and even a careful cadence. There was something knowing in it. Luke couldn't say why he felt that, yet he did. He broke out in a sweat, the clammy kind he associated with motion sickness, the maiden signs of the flu. The knock again, watery but insistent. Again. Is someone there? Knock. Who is it? Luke almost laughed at the inanity of Westlake's question, but the fearful quail in the man's voice stilled that impulse. The silence ran thick as a current. Then, knock. All right, let's try this. When I ask a question now, you may answer by knocking. 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no. Will that be acceptable? Knock. You understand? Knock. Well, very good. Good. The excitement in Westlake's voice was palpable. Are you extraterrestrial? Knock. Knock. So you are of this planet? Knock. Knock. Are you friendly? No reply. Do you know what that means? Friendly. Knock. How many of there are you? Knock once for only 1, knock twice for more than 1. Knock. Knock. Do you come in peace? No reply. Do you come to share information with us? To help? Knock. Do you know what is happening to us? Of the disease we've come down in search of a cure for? Knock. Can you help us? A gulf of silence. Do you know what that is? The substance we're here to study? Again, silence. The feathery sound of water swirling around the microphone. When he next spoke, Westlake's voice was tight. Do you wish us no harm? Sound from the liquid, rustling and shucking. Knock. Knock. What the hell does that mean? Luke asked himself. No, we wish you no harm? Or no, we do wish you harm? I'll ask again, came Westlake's voice. Can you help us? We may be dying. Our species. Do you understand? Can you... A gnashing grind and the squeal of feedback. Jesus Christ! Click. Fear crawled over the dome of Luke's skull. He was filled with a sense that he was hovering on the cusp of something terrible as he'd ever known. New knowledge. Facts he could live 1,000 lifetimes without knowing. He could feel it pulsing against his skull, tapping at the plates of bone with an icy fingertip. He ached with the desire to hurl the laptop at the wall and smash it to pieces, but there was no way he could allow himself to do that. Heart thudding, he opened the third and final file. Test number, immaterial. The day is immaterial. Time, also immaterial. The buzz was incredibly loud now. Westlake's voice drifted heavily, sounding somehow untethered from his body. The phenomenon ate the microphone. Ate? Is there a better word for it than that? Something certainly yanked it through the hole, so yes, ate. It happened so fast, I was lucky to salvage the laptop. A sucking sound. Very close, a rapid suck, suck, suck. A wet pop. Was Westlake... was he sucking his thumb? Like an infant? There has been no further contact. Not in the prior established manner, I should say. But the hole has grown a great deal, I must say. The bees are now constantly agitated. And I hear things. Sometimes it's things being ripped. Other times there's noises like nothing I've ever heard. The buzzing of flies. It sounds different from the drone of bees, somehow lower, and not only in register, it is the hum of a baser order of life, of stupid, willful shit colonizing flies. Occasionally there's also a hammer and the clash of machinery. How the hell is that possible? And laughter. Yes, I do believe I heard that, too. A child's laughter. If it were not so absurd to say so, I'd tell you it was that of my own daughter Hannah. Westlake loosed a torture laugh of his own. This is madness, of course. It's difficult to hear anything above the drone of bees. I haven't stepped outside the lab in some time. Nelson and Toy would only interfere. They wouldn't understand. Their minds are so dense, too literal. Westlake's voice turned brittle. Luke could imagine him hunched in his lab, his body grown gnomish, his posture covetous as he hoarded his dark secret. And I don't want them to have it. This is all mine. More sucking. Luke pictured Westlake sucking his thumbs, pink from the suction. I have to say this. Not long ago, when I was staring at the hole, it commands my attention, I'll tell you that. It changed, went opaque is perhaps the word. Like watery milk. Behind it or through it I saw shapes. Indistinct but wonderful. Like dark wings fluttering. An enormous space filled with antic fluttering. The tone of Westlake's voice was off-putting. There was an uncomfortable echo of Alice's voice in it. The way she sounded after she'd been caught staring at Westlake's hatch. Whatever it is that I have discovered, they can be communicated with, I'm sure of it. Reasoned with. They are here to help. I sense no hatred, only curiosity. Curiosity. The words stuck in Luke's brain like a quill. Somehow, even more frightened than pure hatred. This is my final recording. I will continue to chart my progress in the journals. I am confident that what lies on the other side is beneficial. Are they bringers of the ambrosia? If so, then perhaps they will tell us how to harness its awesome power. I believe in possibility, and I will endeavor to make it so. Click. Luke didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. It was far more likely that Westlake just simply went crazy. What did he even hear in that recording? Some bees? Some knocks? Westlake could have made the knocks himself. He figures that he needs to go to bed anyway. He'll go to bed, and when he wakes up, he'll show Clayton and Alice. They can make their own judgments. He lay in the cot and almost immediately fall asleep. He had a dream of his ex-wife, Abby, sitting in their tiny apartment. It was really hot out. The summers really did something to her, he says. She pulled down his boxers, and then when he turned up to look at his wife's face, it's morphed. Changed. To Alice's face, then to Clayton's face, then to Westlake's mangled face. They then spun together to make a new face. Zach's face. He laughed. Laughed so hard he thought his son would die from the laughter. They won't let you go, Daddy. Never! Part 4. Ambrosia. Luke dreamed of Zach later in the night, too. He was feeding him in his high chair and was hoping he'd say, Dada. He'd been saying Mama, and even Kitty, but never Dada. Luke looked at him and said, "Say Dada." Zach didn't. "Mama," he said. Luke grabbed his son's arms, his bones vibrating in his grip. "Oh, ah!" his son said. "Say it! Say it, Zach! Say Dada, you shit! Fucking say it!" His grip tightened. Blood squirted out of his son's hands as he crushed his bones. Luke turned away and whistled like nothing was wrong. "You hungry, Zack Attack?" He took Zack's favorite bowl, one with the puppy's face at the bottom, and went into the fridge and grabbed something unimaginable. He couldn't tell what it was, just that it was in a jar. It seemed warm despite being in the fridge. He took it out and dug with his fingernails the lid off of it. He slopped down whatever it was in the bowl, covering the puppy's face. The bowl radiated heat, and Luke tried to feed his son whatever was in it. He stuck a spoon in, and it made a disgusting sound like seaweed squelching. He tried to feed his son, and his son swallowed it down fast. "Dada!" he said. And then he started screaming. Not sad or hurt, but hungry. Luke looked down at the spoon. The substance he was feeding his son was ambrosia. He fed his son more and more and more. The more he fed him, the more his son screamed. His son's face twisted into a carp's face, screaming so loud that it was deafening. His son's head snapped and fell from the weight of all the food. "You can never have enough, son," he said. The bowl now no longer had a puppy's face, but a brown smear. He picked his son up, who was still screaming, and put him in bed, his carp's mouth now stretching so wide that Luke can see... No, it can't be. Hundreds of eyeballs inside his son's mouth. "It's the devil's eyes beyond your own," his mother's voice said to him. He covered his son's eyes on his face, but the ones in his mouth persisted. Luke squeezed his son's main face's eyes so hard and then shoved his fingers through its skull. It cracked open, and what came from his son's bloody head was horrifying. But Luke then woke up in a cold sweat. He knew his son wasn't here, but all of a sudden, he saw 4 fingers curl around his door that was cracked open. Child's fingers. "No, that's not possible. Your son is not here," he told himself. The child's laughter rang out, and Luke rose from his bed and followed the fingers outside the door as fast as he could. He ran down the hallway, and it seemed to almost expand and retract, like walking inside of a pair of lungs. "Who's here?" he yelled. No response other than an echo. But then he saw it. A small child's body in Zach's favorite pajamas. His PJs, he'd call them. The ones with fire trucks on them. But the child had no face, just an empty black void where it should be. A child's laughter followed. Luke tried to tell himself that this is a figment, or Figmen, of his imagination. But Luke ran over to the boy, and it felt like his feet were heavy, like he was running through muck. The boy turned the corner and Luke followed. "Not again!" he said as he ran into a black wall of fog. The only thing there, words written in blood that said, "Come home, Daddy," on it. Just then, someone tugged at his sleeve. He knew it was Zach, but he couldn't believe it. "No, no, no! You are not real! You are not real!" But his mind said, "But it is! Zach Attack in the flesh!" But then his sleeve was pulled harder and he woke back up. In the same place, but with LB biting his sleeve. There was no black wall of fog. There was no bloody lettering. It was a nightmare. He awoke from a nightmare into another nightmare. But he never sleepwalked before, he thought. But he remembers Alice saying that it's not uncommon for that to happen down here. LB huffed as if just to say, "Just doing my job, boss," as Luke realized that the dog woke him from the nightmare. He went back to Westlake's room, but is stopped by a loud noise from Clayton's lab. He follows it to see Clayton leaning on a table. He looks ragged or discombobulated, as his mother used to say. "Clay, I just had the strangest dream," Luke said to his big brother. "Huh?" Oh, yes, they tend to be very vivid down here." Clayton never met Zach. He never met Abby, even. He was sent an RSVP for the wedding, but never replied. He never went to any of Zach's birthday parties, either. Luke sort of liked it that way, though. If Clayton was in his life, he would take it over somehow, being as perfect and arrogant as he is. "Now that you're here, do you want to see what I've discovered?" he asked. Luke wanted to tell him to go fuck himself, but it was weird that Clayton clearly wanted to show Luke this. Luke asks, "What about Alice?" But Clayton says, family only." Alice, who was down the hallway now, called out, You guys down there? Clayton shushed Luke and shoved him towards his lab. LB was trying to get in too, but Clayton says that she has to stay. Luke says the dog goes where he goes. And Clayton childishly says, fine, and quickly goes in the lab just before Alice got to the door. They got in his lab and LB remained attached to Luke's side, as if she was scared. The room was egg-shaped. There were cages on the other side of the wall as the door, one which was clearly for LB and one was for Little Fly, the other dog, but that one was nowhere to be found. There was that famous poster of Albert Einstein on the wall with his tongue out on it. Under it, it says, if you can't explain it, you simply don't understand it well enough yet. Luke points at the poster and says he didn't realize Clayton was a fan. Clayton says, sometimes I talk to the poster. And I know it's silly, but if I work long enough, it talks back. Clayton goes over to a little white box and lifts the lid as a strong smell comes out of it. Clayton whistled, like he often did when he was working. He lifted a frozen guinea pig out of the freezer box and put it down on the table. LB sniffed at it, but Clayton swatted near her and the dog flinched hard. The guinea pig already began to thaw as he did. A pool of water began to appear underneath it. Thwit! A weird noise rang out. It sounded like running water or something. It reminded Luke of a memory, but before he begins to reminisce, again, the guinea pig's leg twitches. Clayton, how did that dead thing just move? He asked. Clayton chuckled and asked, who said it was dead? He handed Luke the guinea pig, and it seemed like a normal living guinea pig. But that shouldn't be possible. Things can't be frozen for a period longer than a few hours and live like that. However, something was ever so off about the guinea pig. It almost seemed to be trying to look cute. Clayton tells Luke to put the guinea pig in the cage with the other two guinea pigs on the other side of the room. Luke does so, and the other guinea pigs run and cower against the wall. Without warning, the recently thawed one lunged at the others. Luke asks, how is this possible? Clayton says that Luke should know if he talked to Fells. Ambrosia. The guinea pigs started violently tearing at the other guinea pigs and ripped their testicles off. Clayton quickly grabs a bag of 2 syringes, ones that Luke immediately recognizes from being a vet. Euthasol. Enough to kill a horse. Keep that thing away and give me the needle, Clayton yelled as he put on vulcanized rubber gloves and pointed at LB. Luke quickly did as he was told, and he looked in the cage and saw the carnage of the guinea pig ripping the others apart effortlessly. Luke handed Clayton the needle, and as Clayton got close, the guinea pig latched onto his rubber glove and ripped a hole in it. Luke thinks that a pit bull shouldn't be able to even rip those gloves. Clayton recoils but stabs the needle as hard as he can towards the guinea pig, but the needle bends upon impact. Jesus, it actually bent. Like hitting cement, Luke thought. Clayton tried again and the needle snapped in 2. Clayton, still somehow calm-ish, told Luke to screw on the second needle. He did so, and Clayton grabbed the thing and injected it right in the butthole, and it finally went limp. They both breathed a sigh of relief, and Clayton began singing again. Itsy bitsy spider, and he grabbed a bone cutter, the type used to split open ribs. He tells Luke to move the hair on the guinea pig's neck back. Luke didn't want to touch the thing again, but he was curious. He did so, and its hair felt brittle, like from a broom. When he did, the guinea pig's skin was revealed, and it appeared to be shiny almost. Luke asks, is the ambrosia leaking out? But Clayton says it was never in. It seems to cover the entire body in a microscopic skein of itself. Like, completely covers. So much that a single ounce of ambrosia could cover a city. Luke imagined it back home in Iowa City. Clayton continues that it might even root inside the body once it covers it, wrapping around individual atoms. Plop! Another noise. Luke remembers where he's heard that noise now. Back in Iowa City, there was a place called Langtree Lane. It was near a swamp, and there was a standing drain pipe that led to that swamp. Of course, Clayton, being a scientist, loved the swamp for all of its specimens. The grosser, the better to him. If it was slimy, Clayton liked it. The standing drain had a grate over it to stop stupid kids from getting hurt in it. But of course, Clayton wanted to go anyway. This particular time, he let Luke tag along for an extra pair of hands. When they got there were some pollywogs on the edge of the drain, just close enough to grab. Clayton would grab them and plop them in a bucket with that plop sound. However, during this particular time, they heard something huge and slithering in the drain. Massive. Some primal fear washed over both boys. Clayton grabbed Luke's hand and told him it's time to go. They climbed the small hill near the drainage pipe, and some weird feeling in Luke told him to turn around. Turn around, Luke. Come back. Come down. Three's never a crowd. Come on, Luke. For some reason, God help him, he turned around to go back. As he did, he could swear he saw slimy fingers reach around the grate. Clayton grabbed his arm and forced him to look forward. No! Don't look! Luke went home and woke up the next morning wondering if that even really happened. Clayton never went back to that pipe, and neither did he. Clayton found that he liked mice more than pollywogs soon after that anyway. Spink was the noise that snapped Luke out of his memories. Though the word lacuna began sounding like a better word. The Latin word for gap. Gaps of memories had been coming back ever since he entered the Challenger. Before Luke could figure out what that noise was, a hellish squeal came from the guinea pig as it began twitching again. But that's impossible. That thing was full of youthzol. It was enough to kill a grown man. Clayton then shunked the bone shears closed and cut the guinea pig's head off like a headsman's axe. There was no blood at first. Cleanly entwined, the neck was severed. But then small tendrils of blood appeared and started almost reaching from the head to the body. Blood tentacles, Luke thought they looked like. Then some from the body of the guinea pig sprouted. They want to make the guinea pig whole again, he thought. Some piece of his mind snapped then. He could physically feel it. This was sci-fi territory, not real life. It couldn't be. Clay, please stop. Please stop it. Clayton reluctantly took the head of the guinea pig and put it in the white container again. The body's tendrils started climbing the container then, almost as if it was sniffing the container before finally going limp. The tiniest bit of ambrosia came out of the blood, and Clayton quickly scooped it up with an instrument of sorts. He then put it in the cage where the injured guinea pig was, with its lower half injured. The guinea pig then jumped up and ran around lively as ever. Clayton then lifted the guinea pig to show Luke, and its whole body was restored. Not a scratch on it. This is madness, Clayton. Clayton says it's not madness. Luke just doesn't understand it. Luke says this feels wrong. Like there was something demonic about what it did to that guinea pig. Clayton says it's not demonic. A lot of things could have happened. Maybe it just didn't know what was happening to it. Luke then says, okay, my lovely brother, do you even know what happened to it? Clayton says he's beginning to. He said this could cure things. They just haven't tested it on humans. Yet. Luke thinks, dear God, he said yet. Luke says, Westlake did, and it happened to him. He probably willingly ingested it, or got assimilated with it. Clayton says, yes, that is likely. Yes. Luke wants to tell his brother about that vision with the millipede earlier. There's something wrong down here. The pressure is making people go mad. However, Luke figures that his brother already knows this. Luke suggests they should just go up a couple days and see the sun again. He thinks that if they're lucky, this whole base will collapse when they leave. Clayton clicks his tongue and says, poor Lucas. It must be sad being their errand boy. I know Fells set you up to this. What did he offer you? He always wanted to steal my work. Luke says, Jesus, I came here for you! No, actually, I came here because I know you are the best bet to cure the world. I could care less about my sack of shit of a brother. Clayton's face changed a bit. Perhaps a wounded wince. Clayton says, then go up. Take Alice with you. I don't care. Luke quickly thought on his feet and said, Westlake's computer. He said there was a hole in the ship. He heard things. Knocks. Something strange. Clayton laughs. Westlake was nuts. Nuttier than squirrel shit, as our dear mother would say. So tell me, what did you hear in those recordings he had? Just his voice? Luke says, knocks. Unexplainable knocks. It's weird, he dismissed those himself a few hours ago, and now he was using them to convince his brother of something. He didn't know what. Fine. Show me, Clayton said, to Luke's surprise. Luke and Clayton walked back to the main lab, and Alice was now nowhere to be found. He wonders where she went. He looked out that big window again. Turn the lights on for a second, Luke said. Clayton sighed and did, and the lights flicked on. Luke could swear he saw something at the end of the visible light, but no, it couldn't have been. Things this deep aren't scared of light. A noise emanates from Westlake's lab. Are you sure that hatch will stay shut? Luke asks. Clayton says there's no way it's not going to stay shut. It's locked. They wouldn't share research with each other even if they wanted to. Luke led Clayton back to the room to show him the laptop, and when he got there, he tried to switch it on, and the screen stayed black. The battery died? It was just working. Luke wanted to shove his fist through the computer. Okay. Well, the quote-unquote proof that was on it, it wouldn't have been as good as you thought anyway, Clayton said. Luke wanted to punch Clayton so hard that he died, shoved his hand through the meaty substance of his brother's face. Luke then recoiled. Why did he think that? He's never had violent thoughts before. Everything okay, brother? Clayton asks. Luke laughs nervously. Yeah, frustrated the damn thing will work. His mother's voice in his head mocked him. You coming down with the sea sillies? You weren't built for these waters, sailor. Clayton warns Luke that he can't let his emotions get the best of him down here. They found Alice back at the main lab again. She was staring at the window porthole of Westlake's lab and was whispering, I want to. Yes, I'd love to. Luke went up to her. Al? She continued staring. Al, maybe it's just me, but I think things are really weird down here. Something weird's going on. Alice ripped her gaze away from the porthole. It seemed like it took great effort for her to do so. No, it's not just you, Alice says. I think whatever it was happened in there, he said, pointing to Westlake's lab. He then explains everything, the guinea pig, the hole, and the ambrosia, to Clayton's dismay. Is that true, Clayton? Alice asks him. Clayton says, the ambrosia experiment is true. In regards to the hole, he motions his finger in a circle motion around his ear to symbolize Luke is crazy. Luke says that he never said there was a hole, but that Westlake was going crazy was a symptom of whatever happened to him. Luke says he told Clayton that they should go back up. They shouldn't stay down here. Clayton says, what about the animals? And Dr. Toy? If I leave, who's to say that he won't take care of the facility and kill them all? Luke knows this is a ploy. Clayton doesn't care about anyone but himself, least of all animals. Alice says that she agrees with Luke. But Clayton says he's not leaving. Fuck it, Alice says. Luke, let's go talk topside operations. Clayton, stay here where I know where you are. Clayton says fine by him, and then he breaks out into one of his little songs. Ladybug, ladybug, fly all the way home. Alice and LB follow Luke into a storage area. She leaves the door cracked and says she needs to tell him something. Westlake was different from the other scientists. He was normal, compared to the other two at least. He was skeptical about the ambrosia, but when he came down here, he completely flipped. He was obsessed with it. They gave him psych reports and he would talk about the miracle that was discovered down here. Then all of a sudden, he stopped doing the psych reports. Then, well, whatever happened to him happened to him. Alice says that she thought that he went crazy, talking about holes in the ship and whatnot. But now, she's not sure he was crazy. Or at the very least, she doesn't blame him for going crazy. She asks Luke if he's had any nightmares down here, because she's had the worst one she's ever had. She mentions how she used to be on another submarine during war. One time, a young kid got stuck in the hallway, kind of like they did earlier, but she tried to get him out, but she couldn't. All of a sudden, the submarine was shredded by torpedo fire. Everyone was safe in the sub, except for that kid. She knows it wasn't her fault, but she can't stop thinking about how she could have saved him. When she fell asleep earlier, she had a nightmare where she was in that exact same scenario, only for some reason, the ambrosia was in there with the kid and it infected him. He got shredded by torpedo fire, and she saw the whole thing this time. His skin melted, his wounds were grievous. But then the ambrosia regenerated him, and then all of a sudden, it happened again. And then he regenerated again. Over and over and over, the kid was in a constant loop of hell. The worst part was, he was looking at Alice the whole time, saying, "You did this to me, Alice. You did this." Luke apologizes about the dream and explains that he had a similar one. Ambrosia was in it too. Luke says that this might be the worst place on Earth. There's something wrong with it. Alice tries to make a joke and says, "You've obviously never been to the bathroom at a horse track." Alice says, "Okay, there's two possibilities. Either something unexplainable is happening here, or two, they're all going crazy." Luke says, "This isn't just a sub, this is an entirely different animal." He wishes that they all had the gets instead. Maybe they all do, and this is manifesting differently down here. Alice says, it's probably not that. The base is just making them crazy. Even Clayton, maybe. They walked back to where the Challenger was docked, and Alice says she's going to go in and get a message up to the Hesperus. She doesn't want to leave yet, but it's a good time to report and ask for help. She enters the airlock and goes in. Luke sits with LB, who huffs as if to say, "What are we doing, boss?" Luke says he doesn't know, to the dog. He says, "We're stuck in a holding pattern, girl." He didn't find it strange that he was talking to the dog. The dog might be the sanest creature down here. Alice comes out of the Challenger and says, It's out of power. I don't know how, but the sub is out of power. Luke asks, how's that possible? How are they gonna get out of here? Luke then points at her device in her hand. What's that? She says it's something called a stock ticker. It's a last-ditch communication device that runs on less than a 9-volt battery. She then shows him the message from the Hesperus on it. Current ring reappeared. Do not ascend/surface. Extreme danger. Alice says it doesn't matter that the storm ring appeared anyway. They don't have power to ascend to the surface anyway. Luke says, how long do these underwater storm rings last? Is it like a tornado? Alice says, yeah, it kinda is, but it's unknown how long it will stay. Last time, it took 2 weeks to go away. A blast of air is sent through Luke's chest. 2 weeks? There's no way they could stay here 2 weeks. They'd all go insane. Do we have a portable generator or something? Any way to get the Challenger charged up just to go up in case the ring goes away? Alice says, actually, yes. They could reroute the power from the Trieste to the Challenger in small doses to not completely shut off the power in the base. Luke asks, is there any way they could go around the ring if they do that? Alice says, actually, if they're really careful, they might be able to go through it, like the eye of the storm. It would be dangerous, but it could work. And Alice says she's piloted a sub through worse. Luke says, okay, he likes that idea, but they have to find the generator then. They head back to the main area of the base, and Luke could swear he saw a giant moth behind him, but as he turns around, nothing's there. Only a slimy, translucent trail that may as well have been water. He turns around and says, come on, LB, let's go, girl. When they make their way back, the original doorway hatch was closing. If it did, they'd be stuck again. They both ran for it. Alice managed to get it just in time and dove and put her hand between the crack. She made a strange noise, and when Luke got there, she looked white as a ghost. Open it, quick, she said. Luke did so and looked at the damage of Alice's hand. It seemed a lot of the bones were broken in it. There goes my juggling career, she says weakly. There's a first aid kit in the comms room, she said. They went into the main section of the Trieste, a place they hadn't been before. It was larger and a lot of doors had red X's painted on them. Luke was reminded of how during the Black Plague people would mark infected houses with a red X. They go to the comms room and it was completely torn up. Alice wonders who could have done this. 9 out of the 10 monitors were smashed, all labeled Lab N, Lab W, Pure, and other names. Luke finds the first aid kit and begins to patch up her hand. Her middle finger is clearly broken. He tells her to put something in her mouth because he's going to try to set the finger. She puts a remote in it and Luke has to pull 3 times to get her right, each time her wincing and biting down hard on the remote. On the last time, the one monitor that wasn't broken sprang to life. The one labeled Pure, the oxygen purification room. Alice looks at her and gasps, Luke! Luke looks at the camera, and although it was hard to make out, there was a huge warning light along with the words oxygen low on it. Alice rushed to where the room was and they opened the hatch to the purification chamber. She tells Luke that they need to leave LB outside, it'll be safer. He does so and asks, shouldn't there be an alarm or something if something this catastrophic was happening? Alice says yes, but the power's all screwy, remember? The hallway to the chamber is tight. It feels constricting. When they get close, the wall is broken into the room, not a single way in. Alice looks down and goes in all fours, and she says, there's still an access chute to the room, but it's a lot smaller than even the crawl-throughs they went through earlier, but they should have just enough room to crawl in. They crawl through it and it's very tight. Luke can feel when he breathes that he could get stuck. He loses sight of Alice ahead of him for a second as he inchworms forward. Alice! He screams, but only an echo of his name comes back. All of a sudden, he hears it again. Something scuttling behind him. He knows it's the millipede from earlier. He starts to panic, and as it gets closer and closer, he has to go through a bend in the tunnel and almost gets stuck. His mind is telling him to move. Now! 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 He knows it's impossible, but the bug is right behind him. He knows it is. As he continues, he hears it scuttle a different way. Now it's in front of him. He starts to panic and almost pass out as he feels the feelers or antenna grab in front of him and pull him hard. Only when he opens his eyes, Alice is there saying, it's okay, Doc, it's okay, I got you. Luke looks up, embarrassed. Sorry, Al, I lost my head a second there. He tries to stand up, but his limbs are like jelly. There was no bug. He looks around and sees an extremely long hallway, longer than any other room. Canisters with oxygen line the walls along with the console. Alice looks in it and says that the relay chip's missing. She says it regulates the warning systems. She thinks that maybe Dr. Toy took it, but even if he did, she can't see him going through what they just did to kill them all. So, is it a false alarm then? Luke asks. Alice says, maybe, but it's not possible to tell without the chip. Nearby, there's an army chest that is black with a silver latch. Luke sees it and becomes petrified. Alice sees him and asks, is everything okay? Luke says, yeah, it's nothing. He says as his mind reels. No, it couldn't be. Alice asks again, what's wrong? But Luke finds her voice fading out. He tries to reply, it's my tickle chest. Luke reminisced again, this time about his tickle chest. His mother got it from a flea market. She said, when I saw it, I knew I had to get it for you. It was what most people would call a toy box, but this one his mom got for him was to assert power over him yet again. A sick joke. It was a white box lined with clown faces all over it, all with yellow teeth and smiling. She suggested that Luke named all of the clowns like Clayton named his rats. It had a silver latch on it, and it locked tight. If someone were to get locked in the toy chest somehow, they wouldn't be able to get out. His mother, of course, put it in his room. He hated it on sight. He did put all of his toys inside, though only the ones he didn't like. He could swear he heard it whisper to him. Beat us, Lucas. It's all meat in the end, it would say. Clayton spent most nights in his lab by then, so it was just Luke and the tickle chest at night. He could swear it moved at night, and after that he took it to the basement the next day. He refused to sleep anywhere near it anymore. He dragged it down and put it in the crawl space. He could imagine the chest whispering, alone at last. Come here, Lucas. He then pictured the light going out in the crawl space and the box dragging its way towards him. If it weren't for the fact that it was noon and there was a light that streaked from the window towards him, it would be pitch black and he would be petrified. He finally got it there and told it to stay. That night at dinner, his mom immediately knew that he moved it. Luke apologized and said, I'm sorry, Mom, I don't like it. But his mom says, oh, but he didn't give it a chance. He's gonna march down there and bring it back to his room. Luke was petrified by this, and his father, Lonnie, suggested that it's not necessary, Beth. But his mother once again asserted her power. She marched Luke down there herself and left him there. He thought it was a stupid chest. It wasn't alive. He can do this. A voice in his head said, then why are you so scared? Why did it move at night? He got to the crawl space and he can swear he saw something behind the tickle chest move. He thought that the house was diseased, and the source is right here. You're back so soon, Lucas. Come here. He could swear he heard it say. He looked, and all of a sudden, the latch sprang open. It shouldn't be possible, but it did. There wasn't an earthquake or anything. The latch just opened. Lucas, come here, it said. All of a sudden, it's as if the room elongated. Where the crawl space should be 10 feet, it was 30. Then a hand reached out of the chest. It was extremely long and gray. The fingers were so long that they could reach around his ankle at least 3 times each. It had black fingernails. But Lucas knew this wasn't possible. A very adult thought. He knew this should not be happening. This thing did not belong in the same world as him, his brother, and his mom. He then realized the voice he once heard was coming from the chest. It said, not happening. Stay. It started crawling its way on the ground with its hand. The light goes out above it and Luke quickly runs away. He could swear it grabbed him, but he rushed back up the stairs and his mother was so confused by him hyperventilating to make him go back down. But she made Lonnie go down and grab it and put it back in his room. He gave Luke a sheepish smile that said, what are you gonna do? He had to tell himself that what happened down those stairs really did not happen. It couldn't have. The next day, he accidentally spilled fish oil all over it. He was forced to sleep on the couch the next couple nights until his mother finally decided to get rid of the tickle chest. He never saw it again, except for a dream where he imagined it in a junkyard eating a raccoon and snapping shut. Alice shook him out of it. Luke came back and said, sorry, I was lost in a memory. They're so vivid down here. She says, well, then it's good to have him back. The actual chest in the room looked nothing like the tickle chest even. It was sleek and black, but it had the same aura as the chest. He didn't know what that even meant, it just did. It's funny. He used to chastise his son for fearing the monster in the closet, the Figmen. Now, here he was, scared of a chest that reminded him of a childhood chest. Alice went towards it, and Luke felt a horrible dread and wanted to tell her to stay away. But she opened it, no problem, took out a little chip and plugged it in. The air quality immediately got better. She says, "It's weird, but things often just disappear on submarines sometimes. A thing misplaced or stolen. Things fall through the cracks." She says one time she was working on a sub with a guy named Fields. He had a locket of his mother that just seemed to disappear on the sub. All of a sudden, a knocking rang out. Luke immediately thought to the Westlake report. Knock once for yes, but knock twice for no. Alice says, "Don't worry, that's just machinery noise. Nothing weird." They both force a laugh. Luke then asks, "Did a man ever go missing on your sub?" Alice says, "One time, yeah. But it wasn't missing, it was a murder. The cook and the perpetrator got mad over a game of cards and killed the guy and put his body in a garbage disposal." All of a sudden, another noise rang out. It sounded like a latch opening. "Al?" Luke asked. "Yeah, I heard it too." He looked at the chest again and nothing was different. Alice started to walk towards it and Luke felt scared again, but he couldn't stop her. When she got close, out of nowhere she broke into an intense scream and ran back towards Luke, almost knocking him over. He'd never seen a grown person look so scared, let alone Alice, who always seemed so composed. He looked back and, sure enough, the box had transformed into the tickle chest. Clowns and all. It opened and a voice rang out, "We're here to finish this time, Luke!" He shook Alice and asked what she saw, and she just said, "It's him! He's alive!" He knew what she was talking about. That sailor she saw in her nightmares. But whatever she saw, it was different from what he saw. But did that matter? Something was making them see fears of their past. The chest started moving on its own towards them. "Go! We gotta move now!" Luke said to Alice as they both went back into the small chute. He started saying a mantra that he said whenever he was in a stressful situation. "What's your face look like? Picture your own face." It would distract him from the fear. He pushed Alice and said, "You go first!" He thought that he can save her life now. He has to. He's saved lives before and he'll do it again. His mother's voice rang in his head saying, "But you lost the one that was most important to you." The chest moved again. A thump! Luke looked back and saw that same hand raise out. 8 fingers this time. And he shoved Alice as hard as he could in the hole. "Together again!" the voice said. He dashed into the passageway. His entire body screamed in pain with exhaustion, like doing 1,000 crunches how your stomach feels, but all over. He rushed through it and was nearing the exit. He could feel the fingers right on his legs, though, scraping his boot. Alice quickly grabs him from the other side and pulls him out. They ran to the door like kids running from the boogeyman, which in a way they were. As they got back to the door, Luke looked back. A hand waved out of the access hatch as if to say, "Goodbye. See you soon." Luke wanted to bend down and look back in the passage on the ground, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Him and Alice were both covered in oil that was all over the floor of the base. That didn't just happen. It couldn't have. Clayton's voice rang out in Luke's head. "Just a case of the sea sillies, dear brother of mine." He thought that maybe he was catching the gets. This might be how it starts, seeing childhood nightmares that don't really exist. He had to think. His name was Luke Nelson. He lives at 34 Cherry Hill Lane in Iowa City. His wife's name is Abby, and his son has a chevron-shaped birthmark on his arm. He shakes his head. That's not right. His ex-wife's name is Abby. His son had a birthmark on his arm. As far as he could tell, though, neither he or Alice were spotting. What was in there, Doc? That couldn't have been real. I saw the kid, the one on that submarine. The flesh burning off his body and seawater leaking from him. Luke lifted his boot up and looked at the bottom. There was a scratch in it. "I don't know. But we need to find that generator now." They went back to Clayton's room and knocked on it. He appeared in the porthole window and Luke could see the bandage that was on his hand is now all the way up his arm. His entire arm was bandaged and a viscous liquid was leaking out. He smiled and left the door. Alice says, "Forget him. They should just focus on finding the generator." She says she would like nothing more than to pop a pain pill and fall asleep right now, though. Luke laughs and says maybe we should sleep together. She cocked an eyebrow at him even before he realized what he said. "Pretty small beds down here," she said. He thought for a second. "Why shouldn't we sleep together? I haven't felt the touch of a woman since Abby left. Alice is intense. It wouldn't be making love, it'd be rutting like wolves, releasing stress of what's going on." Luke, though, snaps out of it and just says he would sleep on the floor like a gentleman. Alice's eyes lost their spark, and she says, "Thanks for being a gentleman, then." She says that she wants to look for some of Westlake's notes back in his room. She says the generator is just around here, though. She goes down a hallway, and amazingly, they run into no hitches and they find the generator. They both head back to Westlake's room, and Luke lies down. She begins working on the generator and tells Luke to holler every once in a while to keep her awake. She needs to get it up and running, but it's gonna take a while. Luke sits up and eats some jerky as LB tries to steal some. He looks at the floor and at one of Westlake's journals and opens it. It just says, Psych Report. The next couple chapters are all in Psych Report journals. I will summarize them right now. The journals start out innocuous. Just Westlake giving his description about how they want him to keep a psych journal, and he finds it silly. He eventually says that after 3 weeks on the Hesperus, his seasickness is finally gone, but now he's having terrible nightmares. Before he got here, he had a wife and a kid, and they lived in this house that always made him uneasy. He would find the door open and his daughter being drawn open to that door in the basement. It had this horrible feeling of fear attached to it. She kept wanting to go there, and his wife began getting scared. His daughter kept saying, Nana, which is what his wife's mother was called, but she was dead, and his daughter should have never known her. One day when she was trying to get into the basement again, Westlake couldn't believe it. He saw his wife's mother staring back up at him from the door, her yellow crooked teeth beckoning his daughter. That's right, sweetie. Come to Nana. Westlake quickly grabbed his daughter by the diaper and ran away, and when he looked again, nothing was there. He says, I can't believe he wrote that down. He would be laughed out of every scientific organization if they read that. A couple days later, he says he has finally made it to the Trieste. He thanks God for Alice and her armor-plated mind. She brought them down there and kept it light with jokes the entire time. But he had another worrying dream soon after. In it, he saw a squirrel beneath this tree he had as a kid. But when he looked, it bursted with maggots and they all spread towards him. After these first few entries, Luke yawns and asks Alice if she's doing okay, and she just says, yep, just working on the generator. Luke yawns and continues the journals. They continue that Westlake's head feels foggy, and communication has been strained the past few days. Hugo, in particular, has been agitated and jumping at shadows. Ambrosia is nowhere to be found yet. He says he had another nightmare, though. He then explains that in his hometown when he was a kid, there was a serial killer named Huey Charles. He was an ice cream man, and he was well liked. He had these crusty glasses, and he was pretty fat. He killed 3 boys and 2 girls. He didn't just kill them either, he did unspeakable things. He would often offer them a special sundae and then abduct them. However, he was so well liked that if he was caught, the parents would genuinely trust him and say that, oh, he was really just giving their kids a treat in the back of his van. He was finally caught when the severed head of one of the girl's victims was found. During the nightmare that Westlake had in the Trieste, he was horrified to find that he was in an ice cream van and he was fatter, and he could hardly see through his own crusty glasses, as if he was Huey himself. He could hear his own thoughts as if they were a bunch of night crawlers buzzing around in his head. The weirdest part was, he was at home with that sound. The back of the truck had body parts of children, and it was calming to him. He awoke in the tunnels of the Trieste. He had apparently been sleepwalking and stroking a pipe in the hallway. He had never sleepwalked before that, though. The worst part was, he had an erection when he woke up. He tries to tell himself it was just the normal, morning wood thing, but he is worried that it wasn't. The entry after, Westlake says that they have found ambrosia, that they have divvied it up between him and Clayton. Dr. Toy didn't get any of it because he has locked himself inside his chambers with the animals and refuses to come out. After a while, though, Westlake says he went to the main lab and he saw that Dr. Toy had come out. He was looking at the large window and said he could see it. It was taunting him. Westlake told him to think about when they're going to get out of there. How good that first breath of fresh air will feel. Think of his wife and kids. Hugo then snapped and said, "You don't get it! They have us trapped! We're never getting out of here!" And he ran back into his lab. Westlake decided to ignore it and go back to his own lab and study the honeybees there. They were emitting a small droning noise that was calming. He says that the bees were the first and only animals to develop the GATS other than humans. And originally it was called CCD, or Colony Collapse Disorder. Bees would die out at extreme rates because they would forget how to function as a hive. His hive has started to show signs of it. but he just wants to study it and listen to their hum and figure out what's going on. The entry after this is titled July 32nd. He starts it by saying, "There's a hole in the Trieste. Tiny pinprick. It emits a weird feeling like a pull. When he's near it, he says he feels it's like a scalp massage, but he covers it with duct tape to be careful." The entry after, there is no date, it just starts. Westlake says that Clayton has done good work with the ambrosia, but he says he feels a weird attraction to the stuff himself, not unlike the hole. The hole itself has grown and it almost breathes. He says he can feel that feeling coming from the darkness beyond the hole. He says that everyone has gotten a little weird down here lately. Clayton even says he's been seeing shadows. Westlake then says he's been recording audio files of the hole and what is beyond it and stored it on his laptop. He also hears laughter when there shouldn't be any. Him and Clayton found Hugo locked up in his lab, and Hugo held up a paper saying, "You are not who you are," which means nothing to Westlake. He suggests that Alice comes down here and gets him back to the surface. He wonders if maybe Hugo also discovered a hole, but he doesn't think so. The hole is for him, and him alone. Luke puts down the journals yet again and almost falls asleep with the rhythmic banging on the generator that Alice is doing. But as he's about to put the journals down, he feels himself drawn to it once more and continues reading. The next entry is called Science Day. Westlake explains that he cried when he was brushing his teeth today. He wonders why, but he figures it's because he and his wife got this toothbrush on a shopping trip together. Now, she belongs in a world that he no longer does. He says he hears voices now, ones that don't belong to anyone. A hole has grown yet again. It ate his microphone. "Hungry, hungry hole," he says. He says he got stung by one of his bees, to which he grabbed it and stomped on it, saying, "Ah." He says he's been stung before, but the other bees seem to be drunk with their movements afterwards. He says he told Clayton that he knows that Clayton is spying on him, and Clayton just called him dumb. One day, he found Clayton looking out the big window, and they both saw a huge sheet of ambrosia. It was quite amazing. Clayton told Westlake that he hasn't been able to contact the surface in about a day, but time feels weird down there, so he wasn't exactly sure. Westlake asks why, and Clayton says that there's a storm disrupting the communications. Westlake says he's almost happy about this, though. If they came down now, they might see his lab and steal his research. He says that the honeybees are now thriving, more than usual. They fester on the ceiling and walls. Did the ambrosia cure them? He says the droning of their buzzing can be heard outside his lab now. He wants to scratch the sting that he got, but he's scared to. Then, he says he scratched it anyway, and then says, "Ha." The next entry once again does not have a date, but just says Joel. He says that he often thinks about a story his mother once told him, a religious one, not found in the Bible. In the story, she says there was once an exorcist who could see demons. These demons attached themselves to people to give them negative emotions, some big, some small. Only the exorcist could exorcise them, but when he did, it made him feel sick and corrupted him. But he was able to banish them back home either way. A place where all the demons came from, somewhere deep and dark in the earth. Eventually, though, a demon got the better of him, and his body was found in an alley. Isn't that just the story of Gato and Jujutsu Kaisen, by the way? The point of the story was, however, that he wonders if where that dark place that demons came from is here. What better place than the bottom of the ocean? What better place? The next entry is titled Sunday Funday. Hugo says the hole got bigger again. He could stick his fist into it if he wanted to, which he admits that he had to physically stop himself from doing so more than once. The other side of the hole shimmers with dark water. But that's not possible because they'd all be dead, right? Are they dead? He doesn't know. The next entry is titled Mana Mana Day. The first line simply reads, "It is inside me." He says the colonies are multiplying rapidly and much of the surface of his lab is covered in hives. He says he hasn't been stung since that first time, though. However, that one inflamed mark now has multiplied on his skin somehow. Over and over, dozens of inflamed hills all over his skin. All over. Everywhere except his feet and armpits, at least. The colonies have grown so large that it looks like he has a carpet of yellow and black. They stopped collecting honey, though, now, and it's just black, oily, shiny liquid all over. They also stopped making beehives and now build cathedrals that hang from the ceiling. The entry after just says, Night. He says that the hives on his skin have worsened. They feel connected and hexagonal shaped now. We are all but skin, is something that his second wife used to say. But now his skin is starting to peel. He says the pain is wonderful. He's so delirious with it, though. However, the bees are now aggressive, not towards him, but themselves. Sometimes they crawl all over him and he wakes up with thousands of them on his face. It's peaceful, though, he says. The next entry is also titled Night. He says, there was a massacre. One of the cathedrals attacked another and murdered all of the other colony. They ripped out the queen and now it lays gray and decaying. He tried to stop them, but he ended up just yelling at the bees and they didn't understand or care. He didn't get stung or anything, though. He says, though, the hole is bigger yet again, now the size of a volleyball. He can see all the way into, and then he just writes question marks all over. He says the bees swarm around and make such a lovely noise. He then wonders if he's insane, to which he says, no, an insane person wouldn't ask if he was insane. And then he writes down, ha 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 ha. He then says, I have become the incubator. I have become the queen. He says he birthed a unique bee from his elbow. It was the size of a mouse and gray and had red eyes. When he walks around now, he steps on bee carcasses and they still do not sting him. The bees he has birthed have begun killing the other bees and putting them in his mouth, a diseased offering that kills the taste buds on his tongue. All of a sudden, tons of bees were birthed by him at once. He exclaims, I am Zeus, giving birth to Athena. He says that when they all finished coming out of his body, all of his skin sagged like the gobble of a rooster. But he is now the new queen, he says. The other bees, not born of him, avoid him now, and they put out a fear-stricken hum. He says that's good. He says he goes to the other cathedral and rips it open to find the other queen. He finds it, and it's as big as a dog. He rips it in half and devours the inside. Then his tongue feels fuzzy. He then says he doesn't have nightmares anymore. He's cured. The next entry also does not have a date, and just starts with him saying, Gets isn't the problem. The Gets were a vessel to lure them all down to the steep, so it can conquer them. In this place of death and disease, if they are lucky, they will die. He says what is down here is the same thing that tried to lure his daughter all those years ago, and now it's in the Trieste. It's laid its trap, and now it has waited long enough. This next entry once again has no title. He says he stuck 2 fingers in the hole, and it felt funny. He said it felt like the 2 fingers he would use to test the warmth of bathwater or to finger someone. He says his fingertips then began to change, shift, and swirl, changing his DNA. He decided to cut them off, and each finger continued to move after. His colony tried to take them away, but he puts them in the hole instead. A gracious offering. The hole is still hungry. The next and final entry has no title. He says that the buzzing is much louder now. He had a dream where he was drowning, and he wanted to drown very badly, but he could not. He surfaced in this dream and saw his daughter, who now had the eyes of a bee. He woke up screaming, or laughing. It's hard to tell which is which now. His bees now find the few remaining that were not born of him and sexually assault the other bees as they die. He says the hole is much larger, and it whispers as if it's a pair of lips pressed to the other side whispering to him. He says he wants to kiss those lips, whatever lips they are. He says he wants very bad to put his head through the hole, but he does not. He then says he slashes his own wrists, the long way, not the short way. He then says instantly they healed, and he cried because he could no longer die. His bees stung him as if to say, No, mother, bad, do not hurt yourself. He cried and cried and cut and cut. The final thing he says is, It's beautiful. They are here. The Figmen. The Figmen. Lucas, come home. Lucas, come home. Come home, son. Come home, daddy. Luke then chucked the journal at the wall as goosebumps appeared on him. It said, Daddy, come home. Luke, come home. He knew he shouldn't have read the journal. The last pages were stuck together with some honey, Luke guessed. The last words of the journal were dug through the page like they were written over and over. It made no sense. Westlake had no idea about Luke's son or even him. Maybe Clayton could have told him, but that makes no sense. Why would he? Why would he know about the Figmen? Luke then thought about the words written in the Challenger 4. The Agme are here. Maybe the A in the AG was actually an F and an I. The Figmen are here. But there was no Figmen! It was something his son made up! But could have the entire thing been a symptom of psychosis? But the honey was there. And he knew about the Figmen. Would he believe this whole thing if he were on the surface? But Luke says he's not on the surface. But now he has a question. What is beyond the hatch in Westlake's lab? It didn't matter, as long as he doesn't open it. He has to do 3 things now. He calms down and lists them out to LB. Number 1, get off the station. Number 2, take Clayton with him, drug him if he has to. And number 3, get back home with LB. He asks LB if she wants an early retirement, and she blinked and licked him. But he had several obstacles. Clayton's stubbornness, 8 miles of water, and whatever force was keeping him here and making them all go crazy. It made Toy crazy as well as Westlake, maybe even Clayton. Come on, girl. Let's find Al. He walked towards where Alice was working on the generator, and he realizes there's no noise coming from there anymore. When he got there, she was gone, but the generator was still there. Where could she have gone? Did she go to sleep? She promised she wouldn't. LB then barked and ran down the hallway further. Luke tried to yell at her to stop, but she barked and ran further. They ran through corridors and crawl-throughs, which were very big compared to the air chute from earlier, and they reached a locked doorway with a hatch. She sat by the doorway and Luke petted her and said, "It's nothing, girl, it's okay." But then a frighteningly white face came from the other side of the porthole, and Luke knew who it was. It was Dr. Hugo Toy. Dr. Hugo Toy was thin and shrew-like. He looked horrifying, but not crazy like last time he did. But this time, he did not. Dr. Toy lifted up a notepad on the other side of the window, and it just said, "Who are you?" Luke introduces himself as Clayton's brother. Hugo holds up another piece of paper that reads, "Do you feel it?" Luke says, "Yes, he does." Hugo shudders in excitement, or maybe fear. He lifts up another paper. "Cut yourself." Luke asks, what does he mean? But Hugo puts the same paper up. Didn't see why not. He cuts his finger on a metal serrated piece of the wall and spreads the blood on the window. Hugo lifts up a paper that says, "Okay, but I'm tying your wrists." Luke asks, what about LB? And he says that she can come in too. He opens the door and yanks Luke in, but keeps LB outside. Luke says he promised, but Hugo just smiles. He ties Luke's hand with duct tape and very tightly and locks him to a chair with the tape. The room was square and it had symbols on the walls made of duct tape, not scientific ones, but ones that looked pagan or something. Hugo stutters and asks, "Dr. Clayton's brother. The animal saw bones." Luke doesn't reply and Hugo continues, "Chaos. This is why I locked myself up, if you want to know. 3 scientists locked together to look for ambrosia, a miracle cure, or havoc in the shape of a cure, maybe." He continued, manic sounding even. "Chaos. Think of it this way. Raindrops on a window, they fall randomly, but they don't. If we knew every force on the planet and how it acted, we could predict exactly where the raindrops would go. But beyond that hole is real chaos. Something that cannot be predicted, no matter how much we know." Luke wasn't paying attention, but what he did hear was the hole. The same hole Westlake was talking about? "Have you seen the hole?" Luke says no, but he read in Westlake's journal. Hugo smiles. "Ah. How is Westlake?" Luke swallows. "He's dead, Hugo." Hugo, as if by magic, pulls a box cutter out and puts it up to Luke's throat. "I know you've seen a hole!" Luke said he hasn't, but he knows something is here, trying to crawl into his head. Hugo asks, "Did you let it crawl into your head?" And Luke says, "No." Hugo retracts the blade. Hugo says that surface chaos, up on the earth, is nothing compared to this. It's a sheet over the hole. The hole is the real chaos. He then points to the weird runes of duct tape on the wall. Ruins. Paganistic. I study them as an undergraduate. I don't know if they do anything. Maybe because they don't want me to have them. Luke thought he said the word they. Who is they? Hugo continues that there's a hole in his lab too. Westlake had one and Clayton probably does too. Luke thinks that he didn't see one in Clayton's lab, but doesn't say anything. Hugo continues that he's never more alive than when he's on the verge of a scientific discovery. Just like doctors aren't alive until they have a scalpel in their hand. He wanted to study ambrosia, but it's ever-changing, shifting, impossible. But it knows. It knows them. It is dangling a carrot in front of all of them. He looks away and then says, "We're in a Skinner box. An experiment. Just like how scientists study rats, everyone in the Trieste is some sort of experiment to some higher being. Luke stops him and it says, Alice found a generator. They're going to get out of there. He asks Hugo if he wants to escape. Hugo looks with pity at Luke. Do you really think they're gonna let us escape? As soon as he says this, a loud metallic whine rings out and the ceiling collapses itself right over Hugo. Luke tore at his duct tape restraints as the ceiling caved in right in front of him like a tooth biting down on something, on Hugo Toy. It was more rubber looking than metal, like the metal was contorting to bite down on him. It slammed Hugo to the floor, and then a section slammed hard into his shins. Luke could tell his femurs broke right then. He looked up and wailed in more pain than Luke had ever heard. But Luke was panicking. He couldn't get the restraints off, and he's not thinking clearly because he's so scared. Luke quickly uses the leverage of his legs to break through the duct tape and runs over to Dr. Toy, the ceiling almost advancing on his body, crushing it slowly, piece by piece. Luke tries to grab Toy as if he could save him, but as he tries, Hugo Toy vomits up blood and goes limp. Luke knows there's no saving him. He was getting crushed slowly as the blood continued to pour from his mouth and ears. Whatever was doing this, it was doing it slowly, savoring Hugo's pain. Luke ran to the door and looked back as it began to crush his skull. Somehow, despite him being obviously dead, Hugo Toy let out a laugh as his skull caved in. It made a sound like someone making a raspberry on skin would make. Luke ran out the door just before the metallic ceiling could reach him. It cracks the window on the door to the room he was in, but it held. However, Dr. Toy was no more. Part 5. Honeypot. Luke walked back and found Alice in the main lab, looking at the porthole into Westlake's lab. She was muttering to herself, "Oh yes, Monty, I'd love to see what's behind door number 3. Luke shook her violently and she awoke with a disparaging look on her face. The same look Abby gave Luke the night their son went missing. Alice asks, "Where was Luke?" She looked in Westlake's room and he wasn't there. Luke says, "He was there. He was reading on the cot." "Bullshit," Alice said. It surprised Luke. Luke says he swears he went to go look for her after he finished reading the journals. But Alice says, no, she went to go find him when she got the generator working. Alice comes to the conclusion she must have fallen asleep and sleepwalked there, because he was in his room, and they couldn't have missed each other because they would have had to pass each other. Luke, not wanting to egg Alice on, says he must have just missed her. But Dr. Toy is dead. She looks shocked and asks what happened. Luke says the station killed him. But then he stops himself. No, the station didn't kill him. It's like a gun. A gun can't kill someone on its own. Its wielder must. Luke explains everything then. The journals, the whole Westlake, everything. Alice looks bewildered, but she says things are not normal down here. Something is down here with them. Alice then looks at Luke again and asks, if she was asleep and passed Luke, how come Luke didn't see her? Luke ponders. She's right. She says, well, then he must have fallen asleep too, or even worse, the hallways are changing. The base is constantly moving and shifting. Alice says, okay, she needs help with the generator, but once they get it, Luke needs to watch Clayton like a hawk so she can get the Challenger sub ready. Something is very wrong with him too. She can feel it. It took a while to get the generator to where it needed to go. It wasn't heavy, just awkward. They needed to drop it from a fall through the chute to get it back to the place where it needed to be. Alice said that the fall could break it, so they need something to cushion it. She then has an idea. Luke, strip. It took him aback for a second, but then Alice says, fine, she'll do it. Luke says he'll do it too, and they both drop their clothes down so the generator could fall on it safely. Luke looked at Alice. She was muscular and scarred. If you look like that, DM me. She had propeller tattoos on her hips as well. She says that it's an old sailor superstition. It would be good luck for not drowning. Alice says she's going to go down there now and make sure it lands. Luke finds himself staring at her with intense heat. She says she'll be back in a jiff. Luke tries to get it through the hatch for when she's ready, but it gets snagged on the floor. Pent-up anger overflows and he kicks it, only to hurt his own foot. Luke falls to the ground and tries to compose himself. He looked at the hallway and it seemed to be expanding and contracting, like it was breathing. He went to where it landed and Alice was already working on the generator. She says she's going to pump as much electricity as she can into the Challenger from the base. A voice in his head says, why? Don't you want to stay? It'll be so fun. All of a sudden, footsteps that sounded like they were running up upon the two of them appeared. They stopped close, and then when Luke goes to look who it is, it's no one. Evaporated. Clay? He asks. Alice says it's just the base settling. Metal noises. Luke says, yeah, it's just the base settling. He asks Alice if she's doing okay, and she says she's doing great. Don't worry. He turns to Luke and asks meekly, Luke, we're gonna be fine, right? Luke says yes, he's sure of it. She says good. And then she tells him to take the dog with him and find Clay. And stay awake. Luke goes back to the main lab and tries to turn on the light outside the base to see, but it doesn't work. He doesn't know why, but he could feel a presence out there. Something red and millipede-like. Even worse, he could see in his mind's eye a vision. The ocean drained and a giant thing spanning across the whole Challenger deep, above it as if it were on a spider web. Unbelievably massive, all limbs like a spider, the legs as big as windmills. Lucas? A voice said. Luke spun around and saw Clayton. He looked different. He used to be tall and angular, but it's as if he was squished. His face was pig-like now, one of his arms fully bandaged and larger than the other. Lord knows what was under that bandage. You seem unwell, brother, he said. Luke heard the familiar drip coming from Clayton's office. Clayton says that Lucas looks cold. Maybe he should come in the lab. Luke says he's not cold. It's fine. Clay, Dr. Toy is dead. He was crushed by the base. Clayton was completely unmoved. Luke says that the ambrosia isn't what Clayton thinks it is. There's something using it. Clayton says Luke sounds dumb. Luke wants to grab his brother's unbandaged arm and say, 2 men are dead! But he tries to reason with him and asks, what if Clayton is wrong, just this once? What if there isn't a cure? Clayton says he doesn't care if the ambrosia is a cure or not. Luke asks, what did you just say? Clayton says, I don't care. I am here because I want to observe, understand. I don't care if half the world dies from the gets, or cancer, or whatever. The world needs to be cold. This is Mother Nature's way of taking out the trash. Luke says he can't believe it. Why did they choose Clayton to do this then? He simply replies, because no one else can. Luke says that Clayton's a miserable specimen of humanity. Clayton smiles as if that was a compliment. The drip continues and Luke yells, what is that noise, Clay? Clayton turns around and goes back to his lab and Luke pushes past him, LB right on his heels. The lab was very sterile, very Clayton. The noise emanated from the Albert Einstein poster. Luke then understands. How could he have missed it? There's another hole behind the poster. Clay, you have no idea what you're doing. Clayton says, no one can move that poster, trust him. They wouldn't want to. Luke goes to grab it, but Clayton wrestles him away. They tussle on the ground a bit, and Luke grabs his bandaged arm, and it feels spongy, not natural. But like all fights between siblings, the older one gets the upper hand and smacks Luke across the face, and his nose breaks with a snap. Clayton's expression changes to one it usually doesn't, and he says, Luke, I'm sorry. Luke takes this opportunity and yanks the poster down. There it was. A hole. About halfway up the wall, but a hole wasn't the right word for it anymore. It was more like a rift, surrounded by a few smaller rifts. It shimmered in a weird way, and it looked as if it could almost be solid. It held back water, didn't it? This was the first thing that he saw that was truly not of this earth. It couldn't be explained away as a coincidence or someone going crazy. This was real, and right in front of him. A new sensation filled Luke, like fish hooks pulling at his brain. He should touch the hole, right? No, he shouldn't. It's like a doorway. A weird tongue-shaped thing then comes out of the wall and falls to the ground. It's ambrosia. Drip, drip, drip. Don't look directly at it, Clayton says. Luke couldn't hear him, though. He was dragging himself towards the hole already. His limbs moved on their own. It would feel like home, wouldn't it? It would feel like the Iowa blue sky. Yeah, you should touch it. Clayton grabs Luke's arm tight and tells him to look away, but it takes an overwhelming amount of effort to look away for him. Lucas, look this way. It wants you to look at it. Luke wanted to snap his brother's arm right there, and a voice told him that it would feel great. He wants to feel at home again, right? It's right there. Clayton continues, Lucas, sing a song and turn away, it'll help. The wheels on the bus go round and round. They both start to sing it together, and Luke manages to rip his mind away from the hole. Clayton finally hung the Albert Einstein poster back up, upside down by accident, but back up it went. Luke says that Clayton knew that Westlake wasn't crazy. He knew and he didn't tell them. Clayton says, no, Westlake was not crazy. He was just weak. When did you first see it? Luke asked. Clayton says he doesn't know. Time doesn't work the same down here. And besides, he didn't see it so much as he felt it. Luke then realized that Clayton didn't put up the poster because he didn't want anyone seeing the hole. He put it up because he didn't want the hole seeing him. Luke asks, how does the poster help stop the feeling? And Clayton says he doesn't know. He just knows it works. Luke wonders if it really does or not, or if whatever's controlling the hole is letting Clayton feel that way, loosening its grip if the poster is there to lure Clayton into thinking he can control it. It's possible, Luke thinks. The smartest people are often the stupidest when they think they know everything. Luke says this is unsafe. It doesn't matter how much ambrosia they found. One of these holes or rifts or whatever killed Westlake, or drove him insane at least. What if this hole doesn't lead to the sea or something, but leads somewhere else entirely? Somewhere not of this earth. Clayton says that Luke said the stupidest thing he has ever said in his life right there. Luke flies into a rage and says, Clayton, you may be the smartest man on earth, but you're too stuck up and arrogant to admit that you are severely underclassed here. This thing cannot be understood by us. You are an idiot compared to that thing. Clayton just smiles and says, so what? This isn't a hole. It's something that does what? Take us back in time or to the land of Nod? Luke continues, Jesus, Clay, there's a hole in the ship at the bottom of the ocean. Doesn't that strike you as weird? Clayton once again just smiles. Luke could now see that during their scuffle, the bandages on his arm had come loose. His hand was disgusting and black and oozing. It reminded him of this kid during his childhood that had a goiter on his neck. It looked like a massive unpopped zit. He can't let Clayton know that he knows what he did. Clayton stuck his hand in that hole. Luke had an idea. When Clayton got the Euthazol, Luke saw a vial of Telazol, an animal narcotic, a drug that can be used by humans to make them pass out. But how would he get the time to get the medicine in a vial to stick Clayton with it? All of a sudden, the lights turn out. Then a red one turns on in the main lab. Luke starts to panic. What's going on? He yelled, but Clayton says it's just a power shortage. The red light is the emergency backup. This has happened a few times down here. He'll go turn it back on. Clayton walks out of the room and Luke quickly gets 2 syringes ready just in case. A voice in his head calls out, how convenient. Almost like the lights turned out was pre-planned. Luke quickly prepared 1 syringe and worked on the second, and all of a sudden, Clayton came back. He called out, Lucas, what are you doing? Are you being bad? Luke quickly sucked the liquid out and a ragged hand grabbed his shoulder. Lucas, my child, what are you doing? The voice no longer belonged to Clayton. It was something else now, coming through Clayton's mouth. Luke quickly shoved one of the syringes in his brother's leg, and Clayton just looks at him and says, clever boy. Clever, clever, clever. He didn't look in pain or angry, just neutral, which made it even more terrifying. His eyes no longer looked like normal eyes, but monocolored gray eyes. Luke backed up quickly to the wall, and Clayton lunged extremely slowly, as if he was a child learning to walk. Luke went to stab the second needle, but Clayton's arm almost extended in real time. It grew and extra fingers sprouted, gray with black-tipped fingernails. A twisted vision of that hand that came out of the tickle chest. It threw Luke to the ground, and LB quickly rushed towards Clayton and jumped towards him. Good doggy, Clayton said as he ripped the dog out of the air and grabbed its ear and rips it off quickly as the dog yelps loudly. Luke quickly picks up the syringe and stabs Clayton in the neck. He cries out and goes limp and falls to the ground. LB cowered in the corner of the room, whining and crying. Luke calls out that he's gonna fix her up. He bandages the poor dog and goes over to Clayton and sees that the mangled arm still holds the ear of LB. He wrestles it out of the stiff hand and sews it back on, and thinks, you just had to stick your hand in the hole, didn't you, Clayton? Luke finished patching up LB, and she was resting uncomfortably in the corner now. He ties Clayton up with a tensor bandage. He takes some surgical scissors and starts cutting the bandage off of his ragged hand. Let's see what we're working with now, he says. He cuts it off, and his whole arm is extremely white with little black lines that look like vines all over it, like tattoos almost. The black lines converged, and the entire lower half of his arm is pitch black like frostbite. But frostbite makes your skin puff up. His arm looks normal, but his arm was black. However, it was slightly translucent now. He could see the bones in his brother's arm. It was like his hand was a chrysalis, the same way a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, liquefying and turning into something else. His fingers were taped down, though. He undid it and unfurled his hand, and Luke seized the fingers. All 8 of them. Extremely long. 8. 8 inches on each finger at least. Clayton had taped them to his hand so he could convince himself that nothing was wrong. Luke looked at it, and sure enough, it was the same hand that Luke had convinced himself didn't exist. The one from the tickle chest. Here it was, coming out of his brother's arm. He knew he had to cut it off. Although Clayton was a piece of shit, he had to save his brother. He had to salvage what he could down here. But before he could, Clayton moved like he was electrocuted, shaking uncontrollably but still passed out. His arm shook and the evil hand stretched and fell off of his arm with a meaty thunk. But there was no blood. It's as if his entire arm was silly putty and it just ripped off and fell to the floor. Luke's mind was far past the point of being broken at this point, and he just accepted this as it happened. He just knew he had to save Clayton. He tried to bandage his arm, which had no blood on it at all, or even in it at this point. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The noise rang out, and Luke felt a strange scratching sensation on his leg. His overalls tightened as he got an erection, but he didn't know why. He thought it was just LB scratching his leg, but no, LB was cowering in the corner still. This scratch had a weird sexual energy to it. It reminded him of when he touched a woman for the first time. Becky Morgan Taylor. That was when he was in high school. She was a Baptist girl, and she let Luke pull at her chest because she was religious and said, "Pulling isn't touching, right? It's not sexual." He got the same feeling from the scratching somehow. He looked down, and the hand, which he now saw clawing at him, was detached, crawling like a spider. A voice rang out in his head. "Pulling isn't touching, right?" Luke lunged at the hand he now called Mr. Hand, and he grabbed it and held it at arm's length like a python. He said, "Go ahead and try it, see where it gets you!" But Mr. Hand goes limp, not trying anything. He threw the hand in the cage with the remaining guinea pig, and it skilled over to it and grabbed and squeezed the guinea pig till it effectively exploded in the clutches of Mr. Hand. It then opened and wagged its finger at Luke as if to say, "Come here." Luke turned away and locked the cage. He had to find Alice. He looked at Clayton, and he was still passed out. He could leave his brother here for a bit. He's drugged bad anyway. Even if he did wake up, he would be groggy and confused. He got LB to get up and follow him as he left the room. Luke turned the bend and tried opening the hatch of the Challenger, but it wouldn't open. It was locked. "Al?" he yelled out. No answer. LB sat near his legs. No, she couldn't have left. There's no way. Maybe she did. Maybe she was just scared, and scared people do stupid things, his mother said in his head. Luke sat down and held his knees. He was alone. "Could she have gone, girl?" he asked LB. She chuffed. "She could be halfway to the surface now," his mother said. Luke silenced that voice. "You've been dead for 3 decades, Mom. You don't hold power over me anymore." Just then, all the lights turned out completely. It felt as if getting doused by a bucket of ice water. The fear paralyzed him and was overwhelming. The darkness was extremely deep, ancient. It waited for an eternity to be inherited by Luke. He got up and tried to head back to the main lab. He felt his way along the wall and hits his limbs on a bunch of stuff because he can't see. All of a sudden, a dog yelps, but only halfway as if it got cut off by something. "LB!" he cried out. No response. Not even the click of the dog's nails on the metal floor. He then lost the smell of her breath as well. Luke was now truly alone. The dog had been the twine that held his mind together, and now she was taken by the darkness. He was truly alone. A voice in his head said, "Just like you left your son alone all those years ago." He then heard a strange noise towards the bend in the hallway. A growl. Maybe LB, but in a twisted way. A new LB, Luke thinks? Luke turns around and dead sprints only to hit a wall of darkness. He could taste the blood in his mouth from where he slammed into it. He thought about Otto, the man who built this place, and he heard a wet mop sound. He didn't want to know what it actually was. He made it to the main lab in the darkness, and he heard glass crack as he did. It came from Westlake's lab. He thought about how it would break the porthole, and whatever that black substance was, honey maybe, would pour out and envelop him, but the cracking stopped. He needed to see what this is. He saw a flashlight in the comms room, and he knew he should have grabbed it. He tries to remember where the flashlight was in the dark, and he runs towards the comms room, and he could tell something was watching him in the dark. He would be killed by it, and he thought maybe he should just let it. Then it would be over. But even worse, maybe it wouldn't be death, but a loving embrace by whatever the thing is in the dark. He gets to the comms room and finds the flashlight. He hoped God hadn't cracked the light bulb, but as he clicks it, sure enough, a small light comes out. He walks out and sees the tunnel where Alice had crawled through earlier, and the noise erupts from there. Then, 2 pajama legs. Zach's. Luke can't believe it. He refuses to. He knows it's not his son. Then dozens of millipede legs come out of the pajamas. "Daddy, look at me," it said. Luke refused. He needed to ignore it. If he shined his light on that thing, he might even try to hug it. He needs to ignore it. It's gonna drive him insane. It wants to drive him insane. He puts his finger on the switch of the flashlight and turns it off. And it says, "No, no, no, you dirty boy, you must look." He then switches it off. "You don't exist," he says calmly. He looks away and heads back to where Clayton was. He was the only other person left now. His one-handed, arrogant, misanthropic brother. He went back and thought he had to grab Clayton and head to the Challenger, if it's even still there. Alice and LB are gone. He had to drag Clayton there and drive it to the surface. He didn't know how, but Alice said it wasn't too hard. He just needs to figure out how to drop the weights and float to the surface. He got to Clayton, and then a noise rang out near Westlake's lab again. Luke shines the flashlight to the porthole and sees a hand appear in it. Luke flinches, but he notices it's a small and feminine hand. Alice's hand? He wonders. He tries to get up, but images flash in his head. Westlake's scarred body, the hole in Clayton's lab, bees swarming that hole, the black liquid on the window. He then grabs the latch to the door and pulls it, but it seems locked. Luke puts his ear up to the door and hears loud buzzing, then a high-pitched something. Alice's voice? But then the buzzes got louder, and then softer again. Maybe it was a warning, or even worse, an invitation. Luke snapped out of it. "She's not in there. He's trying to get you to go in there," he told himself. He had to get Clayton to the Challenger. He cut the bandages, and although he seemed completely asleep, Luke got another syringe ready for Clayton in case he woke up. But then the sound of something shaking in a box nearby Clayton's lab. Clayton's specimens are thawing. The power's out. He had to take some more bandages and bandages the box of thawing specimens shut. He puts his ears to it and it sounded like nails on a coffin. He just ignores whatever's in there and pulls Clayton through the hallways. It was arduous and he was exhausted. He got to a crawl through and wondered how he was going to get Clayton through it. He just has to push him through. As he tries to leverage his older brother, he cuts his scalp on the floor, somehow, but has to ignore it. He shoves Clayton feet first and tries to shove him through like a mob boss putting someone in a wood chipper. After he got him a good ways in, he figures he needs to go next, feet first, and kick Clayton through. He got in himself and started pushing them both, and when the flashlight came out of his overalls, it pointed up at the hallway. But then he smelled it. He didn't see anything, but boy did he smell it. It smelled like the bait you'd get if you went fishing. And then he heard it. "Lure love. Lure love." Luke was certain he saw it for a brief second. A giant white maggot crawling down the hallway at them. Luke pushed harder and it made the noise again. "Lure love it. Lure love it up." He paused. It couldn't be. His mother. He knew it wasn't possible, but nothing was impossible down here. He looked up and saw the maggot wore the face of his mother stretched out and distorted. He pushed harder and harder, and finally Clayton fell through and landed on his face. Luke had to move. The only thing on his mind was, "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God!" The maggot was an inch from his face, and he pushed himself through and made it through the crawl-through. The maggot squirmed through the crawl-through, and Luke watched it struggle. It was too big to get through, but it kept trying. Its face split down the middle, and a new one emerged. Abby's. "Give me a kiss," it said. He knew if he did, he'd die or go insane. It continued to push. He already knew what the next face would be, and it was going to be the worst one. But it wasn't Zach's face as he thought, though. It was some ancient face that belonged to no one and was unrecognizable to be human. But somehow, he still felt it was Zach. He got up and shined the flashlight as he heard, "Daddy, help me." But when the flashlight hit the maggot's face, absolutely nothing was there. It was completely gone. The station had its fun, for now. He picked up Clayton and continued on. They round the bend to the Challenger, and Luke puts Clayton down. He was exhausted. He knew that Trieste was trying to make him careless so he'd make a mistake. He thinks that he could just take Clayton and go, but he knows that he cannot half-ass this. He thinks he has to either wait for Alice and LB, or go find them. God owed him this at least. They had to be alive. He turns his flashlight on, clicks it, and points it back down the hallway. He looks at something, and something was putting its head around the bend. And then, woofed. LB! He called out. It's me, girl, come here! But she was panting, her teeth large and her eyes wide and gray almost. She's completely terrified, Luke said. LB put her body a little further out, only about halfway though, and she looked ragged, but there was no blood. Once she did, she ran backwards into the darkness. LB! Luke said as he dead sprinted towards her. He ran like he should have ran after Zach that day, he thinks. He's gonna save LB. He heard woofs up ahead, and the dog somehow went through the crawl-through herself. Luke went in and got back to the main lab. He saw LB walk into Clayton's lab after, and she barked, but it seemed off. Luke went in the door and then saw her fully. Oh, God, girl, what did this to you? Her features were exaggerated. Her front paws were no longer there, but as if someone had charred black peg legs on her front bones. She just tapped forward like a puppet. Her back legs were jelly-like and shrunk like the legs of a smaller dog. Her head was weirdly set on her neck as well, as if it was a doll head glued onto a different doll's body. A red string also protruded out of her butt, like a snake or something. Luke's hands trembled. He didn't want to touch her, though he was ashamed to think that. She's hurt. He needs to comfort her. The dog opens her mouth, and plastic was all over her two big teeth. Her tongue had holes in it where she bit through it, but the plastic was the key. Luke understood now. This dog was in the freezer and got out. This isn't LB. This is Little Fly, the other dog. That poor dog. Sweet Christ. Luke understood now. Clayton shaved the dog and attached monitoring equipment and stuck something up its ass, and then, well, he shoved Little Fly through the hole. Luke can picture the dog struggling and barking, trying not to go in, or worse. Clayton drugged her and shoved her through. When the dog returned, Clayton must have cut its head off like the guinea pig, but because of the ambrosia, it came back together. It barked in a feral fashion as its eyes sank into its head. It almost mewls like a kitten after. A growl then rang out, but it didn't come from Little Fly. Out of nowhere, LB emerges from the door and tackles Little Fly. Luke just looks around with the flashlight to make sure nothing else was in here, and then he rushes to help LB. But he gets there too late. Little Fly opens his mouth wider than it should and bites down on LB's haunch. She yelped and Luke grabbed her front paws. He then noticed that Little Fly's mouth was stuck to LB, or even worse, it was fusing to LB, like it was devouring her and becoming part of Little Fly. Luke grabbed LB and looked at her in the eyes. She was still the same dog. He didn't know where she went in that darkness, but she was still the same dog. She was shaking. LB was scrambling with her front legs, and Luke tried to pull her, screaming, No! No, no, no! Stay with me, please! He looked, and Little Fly had now fused with LB with some sort of twisted alchemy. They were now one being, and Little Fly began dragging them both towards the hole. Luke pulled so hard that LB's ear bandage fell off, and Luke could hear her spinal cord popping from his pulls. He has to tell himself that he's gonna kill the dog if he doesn't stop. But would that be so bad? Is that better than the alternative of being dragged into the hole? Luke realized that there was no way. He stopped pulling her and sat in front of her. He hugged LB instead as she was dragged further. He kissed her nose and cried. Cried like when he lost Zach. It reminded him of when he would volunteer at shelters every couple of months. He had to put dogs down there. It was horrible. He would do it and he would cry in his car after for hours. It was easier when dogs had owners, when they were loved. He was okay with it when the dog's owners were in the room. He was just the instrument of showing the loved animal into the next world. In the shelter, it was awful. He was euthanizing a poor animal that was never loved in a cement room. An animal that never learned love from a single person in their life. They didn't deserve to die. They didn't deserve to never know love. No living being did. Luke would sit with these animals that never knew love at the end. He would speak softly to them and love them. Sometimes they would bite him and it would hurt. Not the bite, but the fact that the love was so foreign to these animals that they didn't know how to accept it. And then, he would kill them. And he hated himself for it. He was the instrument in which they left this world, this unfair world. Good men and creatures die without knowing love, and bad men die in their bed peacefully. And then little fly dragged LB further. The poster fell down and you could hear those dissonant whispers again. They skewered his brain like spears. He stopped trying to pull LB and just scratched behind her ears, the way all dogs love. He wanted to make sure that wherever LB was going, that she knew that she was loved. That she was leaving this world, loved, and he hopes that wherever she was going through that hole, no matter if it's a place that nothing should ever exist, that she was loved. And then she was snatched from him, dragged into the hole, and she gave one last puppy-like bark. And then LB was gone. That's the part that made me cry, by the way. Luke walked out of the lab and shut the door, quieting the voices. Though he could feel madness nipping at his brain, LB was gone, suffering a worse fate than 1,000 strays. He hopes that she's not suffering. He walked out and heard skittering. He put his flashlight up and saw Mr. Hand on the ground. It now had 8 fingers scuttling around the floor like a spider. It started skittering up the wall. He thought it looked like Thing from the Addams Family. He found himself laughing hysterically at this for some reason. It then skittled down towards the keypad of Westlake's lab. Luke heard his mother's voice. "You greedy boy. You want to see what's behind door number 3, right? You greedy guts." He'd always sneak into Clayton's lab and look in it. Luke said in a monotone voice, "No, Mom, I don't want to see what's in there." Mr. Hand pushed the code in and it squeaked open. Then he heard the buzzing. "Come and see, come and see, come and see," the voice in his head said. Luke caught a whiff of something sweet and he walks inside Westlake's lab. He pulls the flashlight up and then he saw them. Hundreds, no, thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of bees. All huge, the size of small rats. He didn't see, but rather sensed the monolith to the left of him. It was massive, much larger than the room itself by far. The walls were nowhere to be seen, nor was the ceiling. The room was the size of a city. There was a city of honeycombed monoliths. Some of it was decaying and collapsing like any city. Tubes ran through it, carrying liquid through it. He focused his flashlight into the monolith and he could hardly understand what he was seeing. Bone pieces. Pink flesh decaying off something. Then he noticed it. Her fingers. Alice was effectively crucified, strung up on a monolith. Her face split open 4 ways like a pizza. I imagine it's like the Demogorgon, like from Stranger Things. Her scalp was split open as well. "You wanted to see my son. Here you go," the voice said. He weirdly thought of Abby saying, "I'll kiss it better," to her son when he got hurt. He weirdly wanted to kiss Alice, but he knew, without actually seeing, that she had fully become a part of whatever this whole thing was. Every vein and bone in her body was now a part of it. He only hoped that she died long before this happened. As soon as he thought this, though, her eyes fluttered open. She was alive. Luke then felt an overwhelming hopelessness. All he could do was take out a scalpel. He knew he had to just slit her throat. The bees, as if sensing his intent, buzzed extremely loudly, accompanied by dissonant whispers. Alice smiled, her teeth no longer there, just the nerve endings. "No," was all she said. He walked towards her and got swarmed by bees. He swung his scalpel and landed a solid hit on one of the giant bees as it falls to the ground. It bursts open and a bunch of little bees come out. Alice smiled. The smile of a new mother. Abby had the same look when Zach was born. But then he saw the final horror behind her. Below Alice, hanging from her lower body, was a large sack, like a garbage bag but milky white with veins pulsing through it, near the original hole of the room. Something then punctured it, and some limb breached it. Luke didn't want to look. He just thought to himself, there's no saving this. He can't save LB. He can't save Alice. He can't save Zach. He just manages to leave the room without looking back at whatever came out of the sack. Luke looked down at Clayton. He didn't even remember walking back to the Challenger. He lost the flashlight along the way somehow too, but he no longer needed it. New holes had opened up and were emitting light all over the base, so much so that he could see now. The generator was against the wall, not where he left it. Did Clayton try to sabotage it? Luke kicked him, not that hard and not that light. "Get up," he said. Clayton opened his eyes. "You killed that dog. You put it through the hole." Clayton looked horrible, worse than before, as if he was drained of blood. "That's what the dog was for," he said. Clayton says to leave him. Luke should go, try to escape. Luke says, "Don't you get it? Everyone's dead." Nothing's even here anymore, Clay. He grabbed Clayton as scratching started coming from somewhere. I can't, Luke, he said. Luke grabbed him, saying, Clayton, I have asked you for nothing in your entire life. Just do this. I want to see the sun again with you. I want to see Abby again. Tell her how much I miss her. How much I miss our boy. Clayton gives a small moan of protest, and then Luke sees it. A cord or rope, or a better word, an umbilical cord attached to Clayton's arm. It had led to the hole. Luke tried to pull it off, but his fingers got stuck in the cord somehow. I'm sorry, Luke, he said. All of a sudden, a shock, and he could travel into Clayton's brain. He could see the world as Clayton did. He was inside of his mind. Luke was then reliving a memory of Clayton's, from Clayton's perspective. One in which they were both in. Their mother gave them a bucket and a hacksaw and paintbrushes. I have a job for you, my little soldiers, she said. That night, Clayton and Luke made their way to their neighbor's backyard. Luke whispered to his brother, Are you sure this is a good idea? Clayton called him dumb and to stick to the plan. The plan was to kill their neighbor's crabapple tree. Mr. Roswell was a retired mailman who just lost his wife, and his crabapple tree had branches that sat over Luke and Clayton's yard. Their mother tried to tell the man to cut it, but he refused. So, their mother purchased some sort of tree-killing chemical and gave the boys a pail of it. They snuck in the backyard at night and cut notches into the tree and painted the blue substance inside it. Blue dust. After they did it, their mother gave them pie. The best kids in the world, she said. The memory flashed forward and Luke was still seeing through Clayton's eyes. Him eating crabapple from a sick-looking tree and it tasting awful. The next memory was much worse. Luke was staring through Clayton's eyes at his laboratory when he was younger. A key opened the lock behind him and he yelled, Go away! But their mother entered in a bathrobe. Come here, my child, she said. Clayton told her to go away, please. But she advanced, her robe falling like a stripper. Clayton backed up, the feeling of hot cockroaches all over his brain, a disgustingly fearful feeling. He backed up and dropped a beaker, it shattering on the floor. Naughty boy, you're gonna have to pay for that. Somehow, their mother said. She cornered him. He struggled, but this was nothing compared to the kids at the Second Chance Ranch. Stop struggling. You like it, remember? But the memory then cuts off. Another one comes in its place. Clayton staring intently at the pot of tree killer. Then him putting some of it in their mother's shampoo. Then putting it in her facial cream. Then in her food. Months passed and she lost hundreds of pounds. She lay on the kitchen floor, weak. Doctors regularly coming by the house to not understand what was wrong with her. She was like a pumpkin rotting after Halloween. Clayton, I know you did this. Mother knows. Clayton just smiled innocently. She sputtered and coughed, dying. Luke then felt a sensation unlike any he'd ever felt. Pleasure beyond anything ever. It was pure bliss. Clayton killing their mother was the most wonderful feeling he had ever felt. Luke always knew Clayton was a monster, one with no love of his fellow man, but he didn't know why. Their own mother was a monster too, one far worse than Clayton, but because of her, Clayton had an excuse to let his monster out of the box. The final memory he saw was Clayton staring over his mother's grave in Iowa City, a feeling of joy unlike any other he could ever feel emanating from his brother. Luke awoke feeling gross. He looked down at Clayton, his eyes falling slightly, tired. Luke said, maybe he can cut the umbilical cord, but Clayton says, no, he's tired. Luke has to go. Get back to the surface, to the people that love him. Luke has to keep trying. Clayton then silently gets dragged into the hole. He said nothing as he was dragged. He said nothing as his spine snapped and he fell into the hole. It was over. Nothing but overwhelming silence remained. Luke turned and looked towards the Challenger. He called out, Will you let me leave? I just want to see my wife. He checked the latch to the Challenger, and it opened with no issues. When he got in, the lights turned on no problem. The warmth was nice, and he imagined he was on the beach with Abby and Zach, only to get interrupted by, Doc, Jesus, you're okay! He looked up, and Alice was right there, in one piece. Luke listened to her voice, her impossibly sweet voice. Doc, you ready to blow this popsicle stand? Toy's words echoed in his head. You are not who you are. Luke looked again. Her teeth were yellow, all wrong. Her hair was thin and graying. "You're dead, Alice. This is just another game," he said. Alice's voice changed. It was now that of a child. "A game. The whole world's a game, my child." Her features melted into a black ooze. Luke hoped the challenger would collapse right there, kill him, but it didn't. As the Alice thing laughed and guffawed as she melted, a voice in perfect mimicry of Zack's voice said in his ear, "I'm so happy you've come home, Daddy. The Figmen have such things to show you." Part 6. The Figmen. Luke awoke underwater. He looked up and saw light, 2 distinct shapes on the surface. He didn't know how, but he knew it was Abby and Zack. He swam towards the surface. He knew he shouldn't. He shouldn't give in and touch the surface, but he needed to. He swam up, and it felt so good. He could soon remember their faces. It felt good to give in and listen to the voice. He swam up and up until Luke woke back up in the Challenger again. It was dark and cold. He looked around and heard somewhere, "Daddy? Daddy, help me!" Luke strained towards the noise. The noise exited the Challenger, and so did Luke. He didn't care anymore. He needed to save Zack. He needed to be the human shield towards his son. He rounded the bend in the Trieste and saw Zack in his fire truck pajamas. He was running from Luke. Luke wondered why. He wasn't the monster here. He ran towards the main lab, and as he did, he looked down. LB was running with him. "LB! Girl, I thought you were dead!" She chuffed, and he could swear he heard the dog say, "Nope, I'm not dead. Some days I wish I was, though." He looked again, and the walls of the Trieste looked different, ancient, covered in rust and the floor in dust. LB looked different, too. Old, white tufts of fur covering her body, her teeth missing. She bites him, but it doesn't hurt. "Sorry, girl. I don't think I can be hurt anymore." She chuffed and walked away. Luke kept chasing Zack, and when he got to the crawl-through, he saw Zack on the other side. As his son turned around, he smiled a smile that was not a nice one. His hair fell out and his face decayed. "Zack, please," Luke said, holding his hands out. As his son's face turned into a nest of snakes and the lights turned on, he wasn't there. He was gone. Luke then wandered. He didn't know for how long. Sometimes he laughed, sometimes he cried. The Trieste seemed to go on forever. Eventually, he reached an alcove. He saw his tickle trunk in the middle, and he had an overwhelming urge to pee. It opened up, and Dr. Toy's head fell out. A music box song played, and Toy said, "I hear the music in my head. It never ends, Luke. Never." Luke then looked in the porthole that appeared near him. Alice's face, with bees buzzing all around her, inside of her eye sockets. "You don't look so hot," Luke said. Alice laughed and said, "I've seen better days." But then he noticed something. Something he doesn't know how he didn't notice before. A wooden trap door on the floor. Had it always been there? The wood pulsed as if it were alive, and Luke opened the latch and saw a stone staircase leading down, like it was meant for him. He descended the staircase and heard his son's voice. "It's the Figmen," it said. Luke could hear himself saying "figments," not "figmen." Luke continued down the stairs, and in the stone was a perfectly cut-out square. Clayton lays there. He was skinnier than any human ever had been. "Clay?" Luke asks. "How long have you been here?" Clayton looks at him. "Hard to say. How long is forever?" he asks. He then takes his hand and rips open his own stomach with a sickening grin. He picks out his own organs and begins to eat them, but they were blue, covered in the same tree killer that he gave his mother. "Honestly, I shouldn't, but I can't help myself," he said. The rock then closed, and Clayton was once again trapped inside his box. Luke continued down the staircase until it abruptly ends and opens into a room. The floor was spongy, like a pair of lungs breathing. Inside the dark room, he could see Zack once again, the way he remembered him this time. The boy who once said to him, "I love you more than pizza and ice cream." Luke replied to him at that time, "It's nice to be loved. It's the most wonderful feeling." Then a pair of disembodied arms appeared, huge and flabby, his mother's arms, and they swept the darkness away. Zack ran into those hands, and then they disappeared. The arms then decayed and left a shining orb. It was covered in shapes that Luke could not even fathom. It was beautiful. Then his mother and father came out of the orb. He was cold. His parents walked out in front of him. "You've come home, my child," his mother said. But it didn't sound like his mother. Now that he looked closer, they weren't his parents. They seemed human, but not quite right. He didn't even know how. Once he realized this, their flesh melted away, showing their true forms. One was tall and one was short. They had pink skin, though the skin was flayed and translucent. They had no sex organs. Their feet looked like elephant feet, and their arms long and spindly. The only word Luke could think to describe them was ancient. They seemed carved out of time itself. The hands on the clock could no longer touch them. Looking at them, Luke realized that these things are incomprehensible. He could live a million lifetimes and not understand. However, they seemed pitiless, like they could not feel that emotion. That's the only thing he could get out of looking at them. Luke could only muster one question. Why? The two beings said different things. Fun. Then the second one. Games. Luke asked, what are they? And why did they choose him? The tall one said, call us the Figmen. The small one said, we've existed eons, watched curious minds the entire time. Luke, you were not the original plan. Your brother was. His mind was foolish, but brilliant. A mind like Da Vinci or Florentine or Tesla. Yet they all fell short, not ready to find us. Now, your kind is ready, so your brother was the key. Luke asks, what are they? And the short one just says, we are shackled. So we fiddle, we toy, we discover how things work, how they fail. Luke looked at these things, these Figmen. They trapped them all in their kill jar, the Trieste, because they were curious? Luke wonders if these beings were evil, or maybe they were beyond things like good and evil. Luke says that he remembered everything down there, his entire life. They smirked at him like children. That was our gift to you, my child. Luke asks, the ambrosia. Was that you? They looked at Luke and said, yes. 8. But not a cure for your disease. The Getz was just lucky. Not of us. Your kind would have come down there for less. Luke then asks, why me? You already had my brother, so why'd you take me? The tall one says, because, my child, you have loved. He has not. You have suckled the sweet nectar that is love. You have ties to the world, to the sun. We would know. We were there when it was born. We want to go back. You will bear our gift. Luke says he just wants to go home, and they say that he will, but he will bear their gift to do so. He must accept the Figmen's terms. Luke asks what terms would those be, and they say that they have planned this for a long time. They have been there when the universe was born, and they will be there when it dies. They planned it from the start. They toyed with Clayton. They took something from Luke. Luke then understood. Zach. On that autumn night, they took him. They have his son. Luke says, you stole my son. Fuck you. The short one bared its teeth, elongated rat-like teeth, but the tall one put its hand up and calmed the short one. The tall one says that they did not steal him. They held him. They did so knowing that Luke would sacrifice the world to have him back. Luke says he refuses. He will not let them free. They deserve to be down here forever. The tall one says it's already too late. Luke is lying to himself. They already know he will accept. He loves too much, as does his kind. Love can bring humans to places that the Figmen can never get to. They say, but love has other uses. They then drop a cocoon from the ceiling. It looks like a moth cocoon, and inside of it, a blade arm cuts it open from the inside. A dark-skinned large baby. Its veins popping from its head. It had qualities of people that Luke had loved. Clayton's lips, his mother's ears. Daddy, it said. Luke put his arms out. This was Zach. This wasn't a trick anymore. This was truly Zach, or what he had become. He knew it. He wanted to hold Zach again, his son again, become the human shield once again. Once his mind had accepted it, the face of his son opened up and blood tendrils licked Luke's face, tasting him. I'll never let you out of my sight again, Luke said, as they became one. Luke Nelson's last memory was this. When Zach was 5, Luke and Abby signed him up for Pee Wee soccer. He was a goalie and he messed up the game-winning goal. As they walked home, Luke could tell Zach was upset that he messed up. Luke told his son this, and I will read it in full. People think it's about winning and losing, sport. About winning, mostly. Well, that's not it. It's about the trying, the not giving up. We're all going to lose, so it's about losing and keep going. Even though you may lose again and again, and you may never win, buddy, not at some things. So, it's about working as hard as you can every day, finding your place on the mountain. Then it's about being okay with that, and finding some enjoyment of where you are, and out of the things in life that are more important than that silly mountain anyway. Zach looked at him after he said that and nodded stoically, something that made Luke think his son was pretty mature for his age. He accepted the fact that maybe his father didn't put his mind at ease, but at least he tried. It made Luke think that being a father is not a perfect science, and the test subjects, the man's children, must accept that their father is not perfect, and the father must accept that fact himself. Luke ended his life by accepting his son, holding Zach in his arms yet again. It was such a good feeling. It felt good to let go. He thought, I'm sorry. Though to who he thought that to, he didn't know. Somewhere, a door shuts. The Challenger ascends. Whatever was on it was no longer human. Below, the Trieste lay dormant. Nothing alive. No light. Maybe someday some other bright mind may come down there to save humanity. Maybe they would bring a dog or two. On the Hesperus, no one remained. Only little embers danced across the surface. The only thing remaining was a being of scars, its eyes peering through scarred eyelids. The Challenger made it to the surface, and what came out of it was truly unspeakable. That's it. That is Nick Cutter's The Deep. That is surely the longest Xtreme Book Club video we've ever done. Although it did get confusing at parts, I feel that it was a really great eldritch horror story. But what does it mean? Well, there's a lot to talk about there, but before we do, please let me know in the comments what you think it means. There's a few messages I want to touch on, but thank you for watching. Ready? Let's go. Before we start on the themes or messages, let us establish what actually happened here, because the book is confusing, but it's supposed to be. What actually happened? Well, chronologically, in terms of the book, there are these ancient beings. The only name we have for them in this book is the Figmen. It is also maybe implied they are demons, but that's kind of unclear and probably not true. They were trapped in this alternate dimension by someone or something, perhaps God himself, or perhaps themselves. They are eternally curious because they are simply bored and want to figure a way out of this strange dimension. They have been there for who knows how long, at least from when the universe was born, knowing the likes of Da Vinci and Tesla, but claimed that those two were not ready as humans to meet them, as they did not have the means to get to the bottom of the ocean. Once humans were able to do so, Clayton was chosen by these beings. However, the more they studied him, the more the beings realized that he was not suitable. So, they worked on others to bait them to work on the master plan to get out of the dimension. They manipulated Hugo Toy, Westlake, Alice, and Luke their entire lives to continue their plan. The two main pieces were Clayton and Luke, however. Clayton was needed for his misanthropy and his curiosity, and Luke was needed for his love and empathy. Both were needed for this plan. At some point, Luke marries and has a child. The Figmen watch Zach the entire time, carefully manipulating him from the shadows, even in his closet. Not long after, they see an opportunity and steal Zach as they do so. Eventually, a disease ravages the world, the Gets, a sort of super Alzheimer's. The disease wasn't planned, but it was a lucky break for the Figmen. However, man's desire for knowledge and science would have brought Clayton down there, or someone else, to the Trieste anyway. They bait Clayton using ambrosia, a miracle cure type thing, and he goes underwater to find it. They build the Trieste and Clayton heads there. Inside, where their influence is the strongest, they work on breaking the mind of Luke specifically. Once Luke is broken, Clayton is no longer necessary. They take him and put him in a little box and leave him there for eternity, like his rats. Luke, with his endless love and empathy, was perfect, and they brought him to their cage. They give him an offer that he was manipulated to never be able to refuse. His son. He'd get his son back, and they would effectively take his body. Xehanort moment. Using his body, they would take him to the surface, back to the Hesperus, which was already destroyed by another one of their victims. They are then finally released upon the world. Free. An interesting and fun story. But what is the message or meaning of the story? Well, first things first, I got out of it was how empathy is super important, obviously. If we want to play the devil's advocate, or Figmen's advocate in this case, Luke achieved far more and was far more important to the world than Clayton ever was. Clayton, with all of his intelligence, being considered on par with Da Vinci, Einstein, and Tesla, was nowhere near as important as a man who had love in his heart. Now, sure, this importance is probably a bad thing in this case, but still important. Let's say it together: the cycle of abuse. Clayton and Luke's mother was a horrible person, and even at the end, it is implied that Luke escaped from the cycle of abuse, but Clayton did not. Clayton was still attached to the umbilical cord through the hole, making it seem like Clayton was never able to let it go. Luke, however, escaped by the power of love of his family. The third thing I got is quite plainly laid out by Luke's final memory. It is the importance of being happy with what you have, not being greedy, not necessarily having no ambition, but being happy where you are in the world, in addition to working hard, finding your place, and enjoying yourself. Clayton could never do that, but Luke did. He was happy, and that leads me to my next point. Luke also mentions how in this world you are going to fail. You are going to fail over and over again. Some things you will never succeed at, but that's okay. What's important is trying, because if you try, it's worth it. You may think that's stupid, but think of it this way. When you are born, you are doomed to die eventually. I'm going to die. Every one of you that is watching this video is going to die. You're going to fail at life at the very end, unable to continue. But you will never live unless you try to. Thank you for watching. I want to hear what you guys think the messages and themes are of this video. Maybe I missed some, or maybe you think I got it all wrong, which is possible. But I want to hear yours. This is my first video since 100,000 subscribers, and like I said at the beginning, you are all wonderful and I don't deserve the support you give me. It's quite amazing and I cannot believe it. You are all so important to me, and I don't know what I would do without you all. If you want to be like these people on screen right now, you can head over to my Patreon and become a super supporter, which is appreciated, but of course not necessary. I love you all, and I will see you next week for another Extreme Movie Night. Bye.